IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And boy, do we have a show set for you guys today, and quite a week, actually, for all of you. And that's Trevor. My guy Trevor's with me as always. And we are going to have a little bit of a changed schedule this week because this week is all about predictions. With one exception, we weren't quite ready to not have a buy-sell hold this week, Trev, because how good last week was, we're like, we got to have another one because I think our fan base is starting to get into to in-season mode, man. They are ready. They're right in the middle of hype for preseason. Lots of great questions last week, so we are going to still do a buy-sell hold on Wednesday. But today, we are going to start our conference season predictions. We'll have some Notre Dame topics that we'll mix in and start shows off with. And today we're going to talk about Notre Dame and it's dominating the ACC. We're going to talk about the AP Top 25. We're going to share some thoughts on the injuries that were announced this weekend. And then we're going to dive into our ACC predictions at the end of the show. Trevor and I are going to give you our list 17-1. We're going to give you players of the year, rookie predictions, coach of the year predictions, and who we think will play in and win the conference championship. We are not going to tell you who we think is going to make the playoff from each of the conferences because that, friends, will be Saturday, 1 o'clock on Saturday. We're going to go live and we're going to give our Notre Dame season prediction first. We are going to go through the schedule, talk about what we think that how the season is going to go, give our Notre Dame postseason, do they make the playoff or not, prediction. And that is it. Then we're going to get to part 2 of the show on Saturday, which is our playoff predictions. The brackets will be revealed in 6 days, folks. 5 days, actually, now. So the aforementioned, not sure if they exist bracket, it does exist. Going to have some minor tweaks to it. Trev is going to finish his up, and we're going to give those on Saturday. So this is prediction week at Irish Breakdown. And then next week, we'll kind of start launching into some of our adjustments. We're going to make some changes we got coming up for the in-season thing. But man, Trev, I've been waiting on this week all summer. I know a lot of times people will start getting predictions out early in the summer, and I like to kind of wait a little bit later and just see how rosters shake out and learn as much as we can. And now we're ready to do it, man. I'm excited. But before we begin, obviously, we do have some Notre Dame news that we want to get into. But man, I'm absolutely fired up about this week and just reading my magazines, getting my depth chart set up, doing my stats breakdowns, and then just typing in all the schedules and doing the win-loss predictions, because the way that we do it is we actually predict outcomes of all the games, and then we come to, okay, here's the record. So it's not based off my gut is this is the 5th best team in the ACC. It's like, well, because like the team that I have number 2, if we were just doing rankings off gut, I definitely don't have number 2. But you look at the schedule and you're like, well, they got a more favorable schedule than some of the teams that I like more than them. So very fired up about that, Trev. But that's what I love this week when we start to make these predictions. And I'm just letting y'all know we're going to expect to see some of y'all give us your predictions this week as well. So like this isn't just going to be these 2 guys right here giving the predictions. We want to hear from you all in the chat. What do you think about our predictions? First and foremost is, you get to evaluate the things that we say and do in the predictions we make. But we want to hear from you guys. And, USMA, I still believe the brackets do not exist. Very well done with the use of believe there, my friend, who is our podcast partner. We appreciate that. But I'm excited, Trev. It's going to be a fun week. And when I told Trev this, we're going to do this week, he's like, let's go. I mean, he was literally fired up. So I know you're excited, and I sure am too.
This was the week that I saw in our offseason schedule that was going to basically tell me, okay, football's almost here. We're doing the countdowns, and I know we're through the position previews, but it's like, okay, now once we get to conference preview week, it's almost time. I mean, 2 weeks from this Saturday, Notre Dame plays football. It doesn't get a whole lot better than that. We're 20 days out from kickoff. I mean, we're 12 days away from there just being college football on TV. Week 0 is the 23rd.
So far.
Yeah.
So far about that.
We're almost there. I'm ready to dive into it. And with college football coming up, Brian, I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, before we dive into the ACC preview, the AP poll dropped this afternoon, about an hour before the show. And some interesting topics of discussion here, but it was released. Notre Dame came in at number 6. We're going to talk about their ranking relative to some other things, but the AP poll has finally been released, Brian.
Obviously you said Notre Dame's number 6. I'll be honest, even with how much I don't value the AP voters and just think they just don't do a very good job, I'm still even shocked they had him 6. I thought they'd at least be 5. I mean, you had Notre Dame number 5 when they had a first-year head coach and a brand new quarterback, and in 2022, and they go, obviously they don't finish in the top 5. They were number 7 last year in the preseason AP top 25 and finished number 2. I should have known better. Sometimes you just maybe sometimes you give some people too much credit. And somebody on our board pointed out, like, if Brett McMurphy didn't have his ridiculous ranking of Notre Dame at 7 and Georgia at 1, Notre Dame leaps Georgia because they were just behind Georgia. And sometimes it can just take one person's bad poll to completely change the ranking. But Notre Dame did finish number 6. You want to talk about just some of the things that just show that there still is some Notre Dame, I don't want to say hate because I think we use that word too loosely, but like disrespect, not respecting Notre Dame enough, or still not buying into Notre Dame. Irish Blooded on our chat on the message board pointed this out, and I looked at in the coaches ranking, and it's similar. In the coaches ranking of the top 6 teams, Notre Dame is the only team, they were 5, that did not get a first place vote. Everybody else got at least 2. Clemson got 2, Georgia got 3, Penn State got 14, Oregon got 20, or Ohio State got 20, and Texas got 28. When you look at the AP or the AP top 25, they had Clemson ahead of Notre Dame. That's the only difference. Both had Georgia ahead. But Oregon at number 7, who's behind Notre Dame, got a vote. Georgia got a vote. Clemson got 4. Ohio State got 11. Penn State got 23 first place votes, and Texas got 25. And I think that just goes to show that there's still a little bit of that not buying into Notre Dame yet, which people say, well, that's fair. Notre Dame's got it. And I'm like, stop. I don't want to hear your justification for it, because we as rational people can say that there's still things for Notre Dame to prove. But when you have Texas number 1 and Penn State number 2 and Clemson, who literally went 0 for 4 last year against the 4 good teams, or 1 and 4 last year against the only 5 good teams they played, and the only win was against SMU. Like, don't tell me they don't have a lot to prove. Trevor Lawrence ain't walking through that door, folks. This ain't that same 2020, 2018, 2016 team. They have a lot to prove as well. So I just found that very interesting. And then to have both the AP, or actually have the AP vote Penn State ahead of Ohio State, was another example of, this isn't just Notre Dame getting dismissed. This is also about other teams being unnecessarily hyped up. And Penn State is certainly that team for me, getting that a little bit of some weird preseason love from the voters in ways that I just can't go with them on. So that was my overall thoughts, Trev. 3 Notre Dame teams, Notre Dame opponents are in the AP top 25. You have Miami at 10. So going to kick the season off with a top 10 battle for the second time of Marcus Freeman's tenure, because obviously Ohio State and Notre Dame in 2022 was a top 10 battle preseason. You've got Texas A&M. Were they 19, Trev? Yeah, A&M was 19 behind Oklahoma, which I thought was interesting. And then you've got Boise State at 25. And then also USC was 30th. And so they were the 5th of the team just outside. Other Notre Dame opponents that received votes, Navy also received 5, and then Pitt received 3. So 6 Notre Dame opponents received votes. That's half the schedule. 3 of the opponents were ranked in the preseason top 25, including their first 2 opponents. And Notre Dame will play those 3 ranked teams within the first 5 games of the season, first 6 weeks, first 5 games. So just speaks more volume about how tough this early part of the slate is going to be for Notre Dame. We're going to find out real soon in the season how good Notre Dame is. There's some schedules we're going over in the ACC, Trevor, and I'm like, this team who I think is going to be bad is going to start season 3-0. Just playing nobody, but Notre Dame is a different story. We're going to find out real quick how good this football team is.
Yeah, agreed. The AP poll, it's always a hot topic of discussion. Again, it's just another one of those dominoes that lets us know that we're closer to college football season. So on one hand, it makes you excited until you actually open up what the rankings are, and then you kind of see what debauchery went down and who got ranked where. And the Notre Dame thing, it's frustrating. I wish I could say that I'm surprised, but how this offseason has gone with the continued overlooking of how athletic this team actually is and how talented this team actually is. The biggest not surprise to me was Texas being at 1. Yeah, I mean, they're just following suit with every other outlet that ranks Texas as having the best offense and the best defense and one of the best coaches and one of the best returning whatever. And, just falling in line. I mean, it even goes over to FanDuel. You know what I mean? Texas has the number one best odds to win the national championship on FanDuel at plus 550. And so that wasn't that big of a surprise to me. I did think it was interesting outside of the top 25, though, that Florida State received more votes to be in the top 25 than what Navy did. After you consider what Florida State did last year and go 2-10, and then what Navy brings back after beating Oklahoma, a team that they ranked 18th in the country, got less votes than a team that just came off of a 2-10 season. I thought that was a little interesting. And then Miami, I assumed they were going to be ranked somewhere in the top 15. I didn't know if they were going to be quite 10th, but I mean, again, it just goes to show it's why you go and play games at Notre Dame. This is their second top 10 matchup in Marcus Freeman's tenure, like you said. And now it's 3 of the last 4 seasons they begin their game. They begin their season on the road against a ranked opponent. They did it in 22 last year and now this year. So that's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold.
A buddy of mine, Joe, just sent me, there's a page that shows you the highest and lowest that Notre Dame is ranked by every AP voter. And there were 2 people that had them ranked number 2. So that would be John Johnson, who has them number 2 behind Texas. Kurt Kenny had them number 2 behind Penn State. He works for the San Diego Union Tribune. And then there were 5 guys that had them 5th. John Furlong, Kevin Carter, Mike Jacques, Jamal Saint, who had them number 3. He's the one guy that had Oregon number 1. And Jerry Humphrey from Alabama.com, AL.com, had Notre Dame 3rd behind Ohio State and Georgia. And you had, said Josh Furlong already, who works for Salt Lake City, had them 3rd. Kevin Carter had them 3rd behind Ohio State and Oregon. And then, as I said, Mike Jacques had them 3rd. This is the funny one, though. You remember the clown last year that kept voting Notre Dame like outside the top 10, Brian Fonseca, who's from New Jersey? Like, this clown has Notre Dame 9th. And he's not the only one. There's 2 guys that have Notre Dame 9th, including Mike Hill, who works for Fox Sports, who's just terrible at his job. But this clown, Brian Fonseca, not only has Notre Dame 9th, he has Miami 4th. What are the odds if Notre Dame beats Miami, he's not going to count that as a good win for Notre Dame? It is amazing that some of these people still get to vote in this thing. And he did the same crap last year. He never gave Notre Dame respect last season. So it's just kind of hilarious to see some of these. Like Mike Hill from Fox Sports has LSU 4. He has Oregon 5, Clemson 6, Georgia 7, Alabama 8, and then Notre Dame 9. And so it's just kind of it's I'm actually counting these up. He has 5, 6, let's see, 7 SEC teams in the top 20. He has SMU 21st, by the way, in his rankings. Doesn't have A&M ranked. Doesn't have Boise ranked. So I just thought this was kind of funny. Some of these people that they're just Sam McCune from Omaha, Nebraska. He has Notre Dame 8th in his preseason top 25. And then you have a guy from Boise, Idaho. Sean Goodman has Notre Dame 8th behind LSU. So did he rank Boise State? He didn't even rank Boise State in there. He has Nebraska in the top 25, Louisville in the top 25. So I just get a kick out of these some of these individual guys. But like it's guys like this that why Notre Dame is not in the top 5. But it does make me laugh when I see these.
Michigan being at 14th was also interesting to me.
Yes,
I thought that was pretty high.
Very high.
That one was one that I didn't see because. I mean, really, in general, I disagree with Notre Dame's position in the top 10, but overall, like I don't mind the top 10 big picture when you look at the teams in there. I like that they put Arizona State 11th, South Carolina 13th. I get Illinois 12th, but I thought that Michigan and Oklahoma were ranked pretty high.
Yeah,
more specifically,
there are
Michigan.
three people that have Michigan in the top 10.
Wow,
3 people that have Michigan in the top 10. So I thought that was a little bit of a head scratcher. And then there's 8 other people that have them 11. I thought that was pretty interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
That is That is
Eric
definitely
Hansen
something you can do.
from who now works at Blue and Gold, used to be at BGI. He has Notre Dame 4th behind Texas, Penn State, and Ohio State. Again, I would have Notre Dame higher, but you have them in their top 5. I'm not gonna hammer you too much. But he did have Florida 9th, which I was like, it's a little bit of a ballsy pick. A little bit of a ballsy pick right there. So, but you'll like this one, Trev. Eric Hansen has Georgia Tech in the top 25. So I know you'll like that one. So
there we go.
But yep, that's I think the only local person that votes in the AP, I believe, is Eric Hansen. So
okay,
those are interesting. But everybody does have Notre Dame in the top 10. So there you go. 6 was the most of any Notre Dame ranking. Like more people had him 6 than any other spot, which I thought was interesting. So still a lot to prove, apparently. Still a lot to prove. Well, but yes, Michigan that high was a little bit of a head scratcher for me. Miami being top 10, I kind of get the hype, although I don't necessarily agree with them that high. And a lot of the others are kind of what we expect. We expected South Carolina to be top 15, Florida to be ranked high, K-State to be high. I agree with you that Oklahoma being at 18 is a little high. The AP or the coaches poll didn't have the Oklahoma in the top 25, which I think was telling. Yeah. But they have them in top 25, which I thought was interesting. I think that's the I think they are closer with Tennessee. I don't have Tennessee as high as the coaches poll. They have Tennessee 24. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah.
But also not having BYU in there, I would imagine, is somewhat related to the quarterback situation at BYU. I would imagine not having them in the top 25.
I think they were like number 26 on the rankings, weren't they?
Yeah, they were the team most receiving votes, and they were 35 off, so they weren't close to being in. All that close to being in, and then Utah 27, I thought was a little interesting. But yeah, so that's the ranking. I didn't have any huge issues with them outside of I thought Michigan's way too high. I don't think I have Michigan in the top 25. I get where some of the hype about Michigan's coming from. They played Indiana tough down the stretch. They beat Ohio State. They beat Alabama. I get it. So it's not like I'm like, what are you idiots thinking? It's like, they're looking at it like this. They were pretty good last year with one of the worst seasons we've ever seen of quarterback play ever, at the Division I level. And they're going to be a lot better quarterback. And, I just think that's true. But I think some of the other losses are not going to be made up for with the current talent. That's why I don't have them as high. But I'm down on Michigan compared to others, but I'm okay with people putting them in the top 25 when you look at how they finished the season.
Yeah,
with the good loss to Indiana and then the wins over Ohio, blew out Arizona State. Northwestern, and then obviously beating Ohio State and Alabama. I thought they outplayed Alabama the whole game. It wasn't like some fluky, like the Ohio State game is a little fluky. You pick that pass off inside the 10-yard line. If you don't do that, you don't win that game because you couldn't score on Ohio State. The Alabama game, I thought they outplayed Alabama the whole game. So I get that one to a degree, even though I don't have them in there. And that's the thing, Travis, you can disagree with something and still understand where it's coming from.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of where I am for the most part with some of this stuff. But putting Miami 4 and Notre Dame 9, that's just buffoonery of the highest order. And it shouldn't surprise me considering who it came from. I was made aware to this guy last year, and I was like, okay, yep, that guy's an idiot. Yep.
Well, another thing that we are going to cover before we dive into the ACC preview, Brian, is some of the injuries. We are going to address what got announced this past weekend where tight end Kevin Bauman and running back Kedron Young have been ruled out, both with ACL injuries, I believe.
No, Kevin Bauman's was a knee injury, but it was a ligament. It was something different. It wasn't quite like an anterior cruciate, like a crucial, ACL. Forget what that C word is, but it's a little different. But it's a knee injury as well. 2 different knee injuries.
Yeah, big picture overall disappointing for 2 different reasons. One, Kedron Young was probably on the verge of a breakout year. We've been talking a lot on this channel about what his role could potentially be in this offense, especially with the loss of Riley Leonard heading off to the NFL. And then Kevin Bauman, it's just tough. He's just one of those kids that you want to see succeed. and somebody that you want to
Mhm.
watch have as much of a successful career as they can with how much adversity that he battled through. And unfortunately, he made the decision to step away from football because of the amount of
Smart.
injuries. So, yeah, it
It
is.
is. It's let's start with just Kevin there because we were hopeful that he'd be able to make it through the year just because of how hard he worked to get back and but you kind of thought that something like this was going to come and that he was going to he hasn't finished a season in a while. He was able to make it through last season partly because he didn't play very much and practice very much, but he missed all but the 4 games in 23, all but 4 games in 22 with different injuries. I respect the kid for how hard he worked to get back, and you just feel terrible for him. You just wished he could carve out a niche in his last season, and unfortunately, he's not going to get to do that. I really hope, and I don't know if he's going to do this or not. I have no idea one way or the other, but I do hope he stays around the team because I'd like to see him. Your hard work is not going to pay off for you personally, but you were part of what this team was and is will become. And I hope he's able to stick around. I don't know how that's going to be. He's a 6-year senior. He may be done with all the school. I don't know what his plans are in life, but you feel bad for him there. And then there's the practical aspects of you hope that he can make it back because he was going to give you a solid number 2 tight end option. We saw how well he played in the blue gold game. Caught the deep pass early on, beat a Don Schuler over the top, made a great catch of the first CJ Carr throw of the blue gold game. Blocked well in that game. Him and Eli Reardon had some really nice combo blocks and 12 personnel in that game. And you thought if he could stay healthy, he gives you good depth. Now that he's out and Cooper Flanagan is also out, Eli Reardon has a checkered injury history. The tight end position is now in a little bit of a precarious situation, Trevor, where you better hope everybody else can stay healthy. If everybody stays healthy, I think they're going to be okay for a few reasons. Number one is I think Jack Larson can give you a role as a pass catcher, a hybrid blocker. Jack's not the biggest guy, but Jack's a high effort guy as a blocker. I think he can hold his own. Ty Washington's a solid blocker from what we saw from him in Arkansas. They both give you some solid pass game options at the least. Jack Larson also had a great catch over Don Schuler in the blue gold game. And then you've got James Flanagan, who, as I reported in my preseason intel, was already going to be a guy that's going to be hard to keep off the field as a blocker. And now I think he gets an even better shot to kind of be in there in some 12 personnel stuff when they're trying to run the football. And then the other thing that helps them kind of overcome this is I do expect this to be a team that's more built on 11 personnel and 20 personnel and 21 personnel this season. I do think we're going to see them try more times to get Jeremiah Love on the field with Jadarian Price or Aeneas Williams or Jabron Payne or Nolan James. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So I think those two things are why they're positioned to overcome the loss of Kevin Bauman as long as there's not another one. And there's a chance that Cooper Flanagan could be back for the postseason or at least close to the postseason. We'll see. But I'm not necessarily banking on that yet. We'll see how his recovery continues to go. But as long as they don't have any more injuries, then I think that they'll be okay.
Do you think that there's any sort of contingent plan in place just in case? Because I feel like it's one of those situations where you kind of have to prepare for the worst, hope for the best type of deal. So is it just you kind of keep rolling with the guys that you have, or is there some sort of contingency plan, do you think?
I have to think that they've at least talked as a staff. What do they do if there's another injury? Do they consider moving a Preston Zinner type of guy? But I think ultimately what they're just going to end up doing is less 12 personnel, but then just activate guys like Justin Fisher and Henry Garrity, who are solid football players as well. And we talked about the scholarship guys, but Henry Garrity is a guy that caught a pass in the blue gold game. He's a kid that's got some talent, a little under, has got some talent. Justin Fisher's a kid that could Justin Fisher to me is a better version of Davis Sherwood from a couple years ago, who helped them out. Now, Davis did some nice things for Notre Dame, but to me, Justin Fisher's an even just a better athlete, a little bit of a bigger athlete. He's played running back for Notre Dame. He's played some tight end at Notre Dame. He's a quarterback in high school. I think that that would most likely be an option if you needed sort of that second blocking tight end. He can give you some movement stuff, moving across the line, split zone stuff, blocking on the edge. And then he's a legit weapon with the ball in his hands. Justin Fisher's a good football player. So I think those are the two most likely options, but I think you at least have to consider the possibility that you may have to move somebody over, and I would imagine Preston Zinner would be a guy that gets a look. But he's in a position where they have some precarious injury situations. Boubacar has to prove he can be healthy. You've got Jordan Patel coming off of an injury. So I think there's at least the walk-ons they have are quality players that if they're your third or fourth tight end, because like right now, those guys are fifth and sixth. If there's another injury and you've got to activate Justin Fisher a little bit or activate Henry Garrity a little bit, you're still okay as long as you've got, the other two guys. You get into a situation where you lose two more, now you're in a bit of a pickle. But I don't know that there's anyone, like if they lose Eli Raridan, there's no one they're going to move there that's going to give you what Eli Raridan gave you. And that's kind of the danger that you have. But that was true before Kevin Bauman got hurt. And it's why it was so important to get Ian Bremer and Preston Frizzell in the 26 class. So I just think with Kevin, that's the case. And then when you look at running back, I'll tell you a reaction that I had that kind of frustrating for me was to see people talk about like, well, this is no big deal. He wasn't going to play anyway. Yeah, he was. I'm just telling you from the sources that I have and what we've seen from different things and what I've been told about things that were happening in the spring practice when we weren't around and even the first few days of fall camp before he got injured, he was going to play this year. And at the very least, he had a great shot to be a short yardage goal line guy. But he was pushing for, okay, he might be the number 3 back. Just as far as like when there's an injury to Jadarian Price or Jeremiah Love, he's the next guy in there. He was really turning heads. And so I think we need to be able to acknowledge that this is a loss when you lose a kid like Kedron Young, who's as talented as he is, who the staff was building a role for. I had a Notre Dame coach tell me last year, we really thought long and hard about activating him for the playoff games. And he actually did play against Indiana. He was in there on a couple plays against Indiana, and they were talking about ramping it up, but they just felt like we've been going with the way we've been going for as long as we have. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. But he was practicing so well at the end of the year that the staff really thought long and hard about activating him and getting him in there in the postseason. So that's a loss. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And he brings a completely different skill set than any other back they have on the roster when you look at that size and power. So we need to acknowledge that first. But then we can also acknowledge this, that they're so loaded at running back that this is the kind of injury you can sustain and be just fine. And that can be a tough thing. It's like fans want to just say they're going to be okay. So they say things that either, directly or like intentionally or unintentionally are sort of like a dismissal of how good Kedron is. And we shouldn't do that. But we can't brag all offseason about how they've got 6 deep at running back. And then when they're now only 5 deep, which is still more than really anybody else in college football, they're still okay. So yes, that's a big loss. He would have helped them a ton because my response is, but wouldn't you have been better off with those 5 plus Kedron Young? Of course. But Jeremiah Love obviously is arguably the best back in the country. Jadarian Price, in my opinion, is a top 10 national running back. We saw what Aeneas Williams could do last year in a third down role. We saw what Jabron Payne could do 2 years ago as a third down back. And I'm going to tell you something right now. Don't sleep on Nolan James Jr. cracking the rotation this year. That kid has really impressed me in drills. He looks like a tank, but you watch him catch the ball in practice, Trevor. He's got some of the better hands on the team. That kid can really catch the football, and he's been turning heads all fall camp. And he is going to be much harder to keep off the field than I even thought. And I'm someone who was very high on Nolan James Jr., as you know, Trevor. I had him as a national top 150 overall player coming in. He's been even better than expected. And he's thicker than I thought he was going to be. Like he's really taken to the weight room. He's built like a tank. But his foot quickness, his power, his ability to catch the ball, his elusiveness have all stood out. So they're going to be okay as long as they can they can sustain one more injury and still be okay. Go more past that, then you get into trouble. But yes, this is a big loss. There's no doubt about it. But when you've got a kid like, okay, so now what do? You play Aeneas Williams more, you play Nolan James Jr. more, you're still going to be pretty good because those are very talented backs. But so they're both tough injuries. I think that the Bauman injury hurts a little bit more simply because the depth isn't as good as what the depth is at running back, even though I think there was a chance Kedron could have played an even bigger role than Kevin Bauman. I just think you're in a better position overcome that loss than you were at tight end, which was a position we had already said multiple times this summer. Like, you better hope nobody goes down because you're an injury away from that being a little bit of a not really sure how this one's going to go this year. So that's where we're at, Trev. That's where we're at.
Agreed. It's definitely a weird line to walk when, you have an injury to a running back like Kedron Young. It's that gray area of you can sustain the injury, but you also can't say the injury doesn't matter. So I agree with you completely. Listen, folks, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show. You guys know what to do. Be sure to hit that like button. We have plenty of more content coming your way. But as always, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, we are going to be talking about the ACC. And we are going to start off by talking about this from a Notre Dame lens. Before we give you guys the full preview of what we believe the conference is going to shake out to be, we're going to talk about this from a Notre Dame perspective because the ACC, unlike the other conferences that we're going to be previewing this week, in recent years, this is a conference that Notre Dame is extremely familiar with for obvious reasons, Brian.
It is. Obviously, Notre Dame joined joined the ACC for most of their sports back in 2014 is the first year that was the case. And that's back when they started a partnership with the ACC where they play a minimum of 5 games a year against the ACC. And, Notre Dame has always done well against the ACC, Trevor, but one of the things that signaled their emergence as a football power, or at least the team that was on the verge of it, is when they got to that period of time where they really started to kind of dominate the league. And that was especially true from, obviously 2018 and really 2017 on to the following years where they were really able to dominate. And we're going to kind of go through those years, but I think that getting back to that is important for Notre Dame in this era of a 12-team playoff because it's going to be very important for seeding. There may be some years if Notre Dame has a couple losses overall that if they dominate the ACC, it's going to help them kind of maybe get in over that second ACC team, things like that. So I think that, having success against the ACC and having as many games of the ACC does help Notre Dame. And not just from a scheduling standpoint, but you have a consistent gauge of 4 to 5 games a year where you can say, okay, we saw this team against this league and they dominated this league compared to how some other teams in the league might have dominated teams in that league. And I think that's what makes this partnership very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're talking about a program at Notre Dame that is extremely, extremely familiar with the ACC. I mean, how familiar are we talking? Brian and I, before the show, we were talking about how we wanted to get a frame of reference of data, and we started talking about 2018, going back to that year, one of Notre Dame's last undefeated regular seasons. And since 2018, Notre Dame has played in 41 ACC games. Since 2018, they have an overall record of 37-4, and those 4 losses are split evenly between 2 coaches, and 3 of those 4 losses are to Clemson in a lot of games that I'm sure that everybody in this chat remembers. And so Notre Dame, again, very, very familiar with the ACC, 41 total ACC matchups since dating back to 2018.
Yeah.
But Notre Dame has kind of had a level of dominance in those.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, Trev, when you first look at the league, obviously 14, they had 2 losses to the ACC. They got beat by Florida State on the road, then got beat by Louisville that year, had some success the next year, beat everybody except for Clemson, had a win that we thought at the time was going to be a big win over Georgia Tech. Turned out they weren't that good that year. They were 14th and they beat them. Then you got in 2016 and Notre Dame loses 3 ACC games, 4 if you count teams that are now ACC, and only had 2 ACC wins, which is the weird thing about that year is one of those wins over an ACC team was over a Miami team that won 9 games and finished in the top 20 that year, which just kind of says some of the just the weirdness of that year. But really 2017 is when you started to see things somewhat turn, but you still then had that blowout loss to Miami. So you weren't completely dominating the league. But 2018 is really when you started to see that dominance, Trevor. And since that time, you did the math. I think it was 37-4 against the ACC since 2018. And 2 of those 4 losses, I believe it's like, so up until 2023, the losses that they had were all postseason losses. You had the Cotton Bowl loss in 2018 to Clemson. You had the ACC title game loss to Clemson in 2020. The first time that Notre Dame lost to an ACC team during the season is when Louisville beat them in 2023. That snapped a very long, I think, a 30-something, close to 30-something game regular season win streak that went back to that Miami game in 2017. And so you go 5-1 in 2018, 5-0 in 2019, you go 9-1 in 2020, 5-0 in 21, 4-0 in 2022. And then 2023 comes and you have the loss to Clemson on the road. You have the loss to Louisville on the road. You almost get beat by Duke. And it was kind of like, okay, is the dominance over the league kind of going away? And there's some questions about that. And then 2023 happens. And I think that's when Notre Dame, or 2024 happens, and Notre Dame kind of reestablishes themselves against the ACC. And not only did they go 5-0 last year, Trev, but it was a convincing 5-0. You had a win over Louisville, which was a hard-fought game. You win by a touchdown, but you were up 2 touchdowns for a good chunk of the second half of that game. Never felt like Louisville was going to win it. Got a little bit of a payback from that game. Then you got and beat Stanford by 42. You beat Georgia Tech by 18 in a game that wasn't close in the second half. You beat Florida State by 49. You beat Virginia by 21 in a game where they scored the last 2 touchdowns of the game. And so you not only went undefeated against the league, you dominated the league again. And so when I look at that, it's like, okay, has Marcus Freeman sort of reestablished himself against the league? We're going to find out next time he plays like a Clemson, but like that's what the Miami game is. That's why this year is important, because the difference between this year and last year is I think you're going to play some more teams, and we'll find out what we think about that when we get to the conference predictions later in the show. But you're playing some teams in the ACC this year that people are expecting to be in the top portion of that league, where last year you didn't play Clemson, you didn't play Miami, you didn't play SMU, you didn't play – the only top team you played was really Louisville, and they gave you a game. And so I do think that this year is going to be very telling about whether or not Notre Dame has reestablished its dominance over that league. And it's going to start in game 1. I mean, you go on the road against Miami, who a lot of people think has a legitimate shot to play to get to the ACC title game, against Clemson. And then, of course, you're going to get – once you get into October, that's when the ACC schedule really ramps up. You don't play another ACC team until October 11th against NC State. And then the month of November is the ACC plus Navy. And your whole month of November is playing ACC games. So if you're in a situation where, let's say Notre Dame is not undefeated, they're battling for a hosting spot against, let's say, a number 1 ACC team or a number 2 ACC team, because this year the conference champions don't get that. You're now going to have a say, okay, well, Clemson beat Miami in both a 3-point win in the ACC title game, or they beat Pitt by a touchdown in the ACC title game. Notre Dame beat that team by 17 on the road, or that beat them by whatever on the road. You now have a comparable margin, or it's the opposite. Clemson beat that team by 20-something in the ACC title game, and Notre Dame beat them on a last-second field goal. So how you perform against them is going to be something that the committee can look at and say, we have this tangible evidence of how Notre Dame's going to perform against over a third of their schedule, almost half of their schedule being the ACC, and then you've got two SEC games and multiple Big Ten games. But the ACC portion of it is important because it gives the committee a gauge, but it also is going to allow Notre Dame to have some jockeying position when it comes to seeding against the ACC champ, since the top 4 ranked conferences don't get buys anymore. What if Notre Dame and Clemson are battling for that? Who's going to be the 4? Who's going to get the bye or not? Or who's going to be, seated here and get that matchup, that tough matchup, or not the tough matchup? Now you have something that you're going to be able to say, hey, look, we played 5 teams from that league and we dominated, and much more convincingly than Clemson did, or SMU, or whoever wins the league. And I think that's a very important ingredient for Notre Dame when it comes to establish himself in the playoff. That's kind of the first part of, I think, why this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Notre Dame has been considered like an honorary ACC member. I know they're not officially part of the conference, but with their agreement, their scheduling agreement, Notre Dame gets thought of highly and is thought of up there along with the Clemsons of the world. Yeah, I mean, you look at what the FanDuel odds say, and we talk all the time about what Notre Dame's odds to go undefeated are. And right now, they're tied for second with Clemson, and they're both at plus 420 odds to go undefeated. And so, when I look at Notre Dame compared to the rest of the ACC, it's a conference that you have to maintain dominance in. But Brian, to your point about what their schedule is this year against the ACC, it's tough. I mean, 4 of their 6 games in the ACC are on the road. I mean, they're against Miami on the road. They're at Boston College. They're at Pitt, and they're at Stanford. And so it's going to be not just, do you get them at home and do you beat the brakes off of Stanford at home and do you get Louisville
Forgot
at
about
home?
Stanford. So it's literally half your schedule is the ACC this year. I completely forgot about Stanford. Yes, thank you for that, Trevor.
And so if they're able to go on these road kind of like if they're able to go on this little road conquest against the ACC, not only is Marcus Freeman able to say, hey, Notre Dame is back to being a dominant power when it comes to facing the ACC, they also went and did it in tough places to play in the ACC. You're going to Pitt, a team that we both think is going to have a better year this year, a team against Boston College, another team that we think is going to have a better year this season. And then you started out against Miami down in Hard Rock. And so there's going to be prove-it games in there along the way. And then, I mean, we know what Stanford is. We previewed them last week, but that's still the last game of the year you're flying across the country. And if that can be a big issue for a bunch of Big Ten teams, it can also be an issue for Notre Dame. And so traveling across the country to finish your season in LA, it's not, I don't want to chalk it up to a give me, but that's still another barrier that you're going to have to face. Then the 2 teams you get at home is Syracuse and NC State. And so if Notre Dame is able to maintain dominance over the ACC this year, I think that's going to mean a little bit more too.
I think it's also important. I think you're spot on, Trevor. When I look at that schedule, and people talk about it's a manageable schedule. It's very manageable. Somebody said in the chat, and I get that because there's no like outside of Miami, no like dominant teams on there. But I do think there's some tough games in there. That I also think that your ACC slate is going to be important because of your late season. You are playing at Pitt late, and I think Pitt's going to be a good team. I was surprised how high you had Pitt because I thought I was going to be like this really outside the box thinker that's a lot higher on Pitt than other people are. And then you had them up there too. So I was a little disappointed in that, but also proud of myself for making a strong hire. So, but you're going to play Pitt on the road. I think BC has a chance to be a solid team this year. You play them on the road. You talk about playing Syracuse late in the year. And so you're going to, how you fare against the ACC is also going to prepare you for the postseason. It's the ACC games that are going to be the ones that are building you for the postseason because if you look at it and you look at Notre Dame's last 7 games, 5 of them are against the ACC, with the only exceptions being USC and Navy, and then 3 of them being on the road. It's still weird to contemplate Stanford being an ACC team. I'm still getting used to that. But to your point, that's going to be your test. And I do think it's a manageable schedule. And if Notre Dame is a playoff team this year, then it's because they were able to go against that ACC slate and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they're able to put together a good season, we talked about how front-loaded Notre Dame's schedule is in terms of the difficulty of the schedule. I mean, you're on the road against Miami, then you host Texas A&M. A couple weeks later, you're on the road against Arkansas. You get Boise State at home. Then you wrap it all up with USC. And before that, you have that potential trap game against NC State. But the home stretch of what's going to be, to your point, Brian, building you up for the playoffs, that's all going to come in the ACC. And it's going to be against some opponents that we're getting ready to preview here in a little bit that could be a little bit tougher than just what their name says on the schedule. And I think that's going to be really interesting.
I also think there's a level of this is important for Marcus Freeman and the program big picture as well, not just for the 2025 season, because you did dominate the ACC for a long period of time. Really from 18 to 23, you dominated the league. Even Marcus Freeman's first year in 2022, there was obviously plenty of ups and downs, but the ACC slate was one of the bright spots of Freeman's first year. You beat North Carolina on the road convincingly. You beat Syracuse on the road convincingly. You blew out Clemson. You blew out. I mean, if they didn't have a single-digit game against their 4 ACC opponents that year, Trevor, they beat North Carolina by 13, and it wasn't that close. They pulled their starters when North Carolina's last touchdown or two were against backups. You beat Syracuse by 17 on the road in a convincing win where it was big. Game was basically over at halftime. You blew out Clemson 35-14, and then you beat Boston College 44-0. And you're thinking, okay, we know that he's going to continue that dominance over the ACC. And then the next year, obviously, things change. You beat NC State on the road by 21. Then you beat Duke in a very close game that you kind of caught some breaks in that game. You get blown out by Louisville. Then you beat Pitt convincingly, and then it was an 8-point loss, but it was an 8-point loss where it's like Clemson was the better team that day from start to finish. I mean, Notre Dame's talent is what kind of allowed them to even be in that game, but like they got outplayed and outcoached for 60 minutes in that game. And then you lose that game, and then you go out and blow out Wake Forest, but you're like, who cares? Wake Forest isn't even that good. And so coming into last year and seeing the success they had against the league was important. But I don't know that I felt it was going to be as dominant because the first ACC game was a competitive game against Louisville. But then after that, obviously, they dominated and took control of the league. So I think just having that from a recruiting standpoint is important as well. You know, what are the areas that Notre Dame is trying to recruit a lot right now? Well, they're trying to recruit North Carolina. It's a pretty big deal. They're trying to get into Virginia more. They're trying to get into South Carolina more, and they're definitely in Georgia and Florida. Well, you look at their schedule in this past year, these upcoming years, and you say, okay, well, they're playing teams from North Carolina, I think, every year. I think last year, I'm trying to think. Last year was the first time. I'd have to go back. It's been a while since Notre Dame didn't play a team from North Carolina in their schedule. Either Duke, North Carolina, or NC State, or Wake. First time in a while they didn't play a team from North Carolina. Well, this year you're going to have another North Carolina team back on your schedule because you have NC State. You're trying to get into Georgia, so you're playing Georgia Tech down there in games. You're playing against them. This year you play at Miami. It's a Florida school. And then to a degree, SMU being in the ACC now, but I don't know how many Texas kids like think ACC football when they, in the state of Texas, think ACC football, you know what I mean? Because of SMU. But I do think getting into that state is very important. You play a team from South Carolina, you played them in 2023. They've clearly wanted to establish themselves on the East Coast from Virginia on down and really from Maryland on down. But that's a big reason why the ACC was important. And you don't just want to be able to play those teams. You want to be able to beat and dominate those teams. Why shouldn't you go to North Carolina or NC State instead of us? Why should you not go to a team in Georgia or a team in Florida? Have you seen what we do to those teams? Right? Come be part of what we're doing, and we're bigger and badder, and we're going to take this thing to the next level. So I think those things are all important into building your program. Obviously, you want the ACC to be strong as a league, but the biggest thing is you've got the schedule, but it's the recruiting foundation, Trev. It's playing against teams from those kids' home states and then winning and dominating year after year. And so it's not just the winning part, but it's the fact that they've dominated, because prior to 2023, the vast majority of the games that they've played against the ACC were not really competitive. I mean, they were convincing win after convincing win. There's some exceptions. Pitt gave them a close game in 2018. Virginia Tech gave them a close game in 19 and 21. But for the most part, a lot of these games have been not convincing at all. They've been very dominant wins. And I think they need to keep that going. And I think doing so is good for the program in a lot of different ways. This year in particular, Trev, I wanted to ask you this. I believe that the ACC has a shot to have 2 teams in the playoff again this year. Maybe 3. Maybe. But I think it's going to be tough. Does the ACC, because here's the thing, you want to, all these things matter, but I think here's the thing that's not in Notre Dame's control that's important. You need the ACC to overall be better, because that's the other thing that helps them. Right now, the ACC slate helps you against the ACC teams that are going to be going in the college football playoff. It gives you a schedule to build around. It gives you recruiting. All these things are positives, but for the most part, it doesn't give you a boost compared to the Big Ten or the SEC, because the ACC is not a great league right now. So I think that's one thing is you hope that playing you will then also help the teams in the league improve because they need NC State to be consistently better. They need Louisville to be consistently better. They need Bill Belichick to turn North Carolina around. They need Virginia Tech to get turned around. They need Brent Key to keep doing what he's doing at Georgia Tech. And they need to, Rhett Lashley's year last year at SMU to not be a fluke. And I think they need Clemson to get back to being a dominant program. Because if you can still have your success against that league, but now that league is more respected, I think that's where you can start to say, hey, we play against the ACC and we dominated, and I just watched 6 SEC teams lose to an ACC team this year. And I think that's an important part too. If the ACC can start being better, then it gives an even greater boost to Notre Dame when you talk about how they're viewed in the postseason.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Notre Dame is in a spot where they need the ACC to catch up with where they're at, where Notre Dame is at as a program. What I mean by that is it's kind of you get multiple benefits on both sides. If the ACC starts to step up their game, Notre Dame can point to, hey, we beat that team and we beat that team, or you know how the transitive property always works in college football. We beat that team, who beat that team on the road, so on and so forth. But to your point about the ACC potentially having multiple playoff teams in this year, Brian, that's going to look better for Notre Dame because one of their biggest knocks is still they're not in the conference, and that's going to be their biggest knock till the end of time. But with their relationship with the ACC, if they can say, hey, look, yes, we have a relationship with the ACC. We just set up a 12-game home-and-home series with Clemson that starts in 2027. We just played Miami and Hard Rock. Look at what they did last year, and look what they could potentially do in 25 and 26 and beyond if Mario Cristobal can keep up the recruiting efforts and bringing in some of these players. And then if they can say, hey, look, we're not just playing every single year Wake Forest and Virginia and Stanford and Virginia. It's, hey, we're playing Georgia Tech. We're playing Louisville. We're playing Miami. We have this home-and-home schedule with Clemson. I think that's going to do well for Notre Dame, and it's going to do well for the ACC opponents because that's going to be playing Notre Dame and or Clemson right now is going to give them their best look at what a playoff-level opponent is going to look like, in my opinion.
Yes. I think the Clemson schedule is huge. Huge. As long as Clemson can maintain being really good. I mean, you look at the 2026 slate, Trev, for example, look, Notre Dame needs Florida State to get back to being Florida State. That's good for the ACC, which is good for Notre Dame. And then if you play Florida State at Florida State next year, if you beat them and they're 10-2, that's huge for your resume. Because the better the teams are that Notre Dame beats, the more margin for error Notre Dame has with their own win-loss record when it comes to the postseason. Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, all three of them are in if they're 10-2 last year. In. There was a 10-2 ACC team last year that blew out an SEC team on the road, didn't get in the college football playoff in Miami. Why? Because their schedule was perceived to be soft because they didn't play Clemson. And, I think Miami got screwed, to be completely honest with you, when you look at their overall resume. They had a bigger beef than Alabama and South Carolina and Ole Miss, especially Ole Miss and Alabama, who had some terrible losses on their schedule. Like, what were the quote-unquote bad losses that Miami had? They lost a 10-win Syracuse team and a Georgia Tech team who went to a bowl game at 7-5 and almost beat Georgia, the SEC champs. Needed like 9 overtimes on their home field to beat Georgia Tech.
Yep.
And so but why? Because the overall perception of the league is it's down. Your champion got dominated by Georgia and lost at home to South Carolina. That's who, your runner-up team played a top 4 Big 12 team at home and got beat. There was rightfully no respect for the Big 12 last year, or ACC last year. Nobody cares that Miami beat an average Florida team. Nobody cares that Louisville dominated a terrible Kentucky team. Now, you and I would say, well, hold on a second. That terrible Kentucky team almost beat Georgia and beat Ole Miss on the road, and Louisville destroyed them. Don't care. ACC sucks. That's the response you get. And so I do think it's important for the ACC to get better. I think it's important for Notre Dame. If Florida State is getting back to being Florida State and Miami gets back to being the U, next year's schedule looks a whole lot different than it does with what those teams have been for the most part of the last decade. Florida State had that nice 2-year stretch in 22 and 23, and then 24 they fall back down to earth. I mean, Florida State in the last 5 years has had as many sub 500 seasons as they've had 10+ win seasons, 2-2. And obviously Miami's just been kind of okay. You hope that Bill Belichick can win. You can get North Carolina back on track and being what we thought Mac Brown was going to do for that program. Because if they're good again and you go into Chapel Hill next year and beat them, now all of a sudden your resume gets boosted as opposed to who cares what was going on in the SEC and the Big Ten. And that's where it's at right now. And the thing that's hurt the ACC is there have been very few years where Florida State, Miami, and Clemson were all good. Very few years where they were all good. There's been years where one or two of them are good, but when Clemson started their ascent, that's when Florida State started their descent. Under Willie Taggart, and then obviously, the beginning of the Mike Norvell era, and it just hasn't been great. So they need it. They need it to be a stronger league overall. And that's my advice to the ACC is stop being pissed at Notre Dame and start using Notre Dame. Stop whining about, Notre Dame gets to do this and this and this, and look at it as a blessing. Hey, we get to actually have games against Notre Dame. Hey, you come here, you get to go, some teams are going to say, hey, you get to go to play Notre Dame Stadium twice in your career as on top of the ACC. You're going to be on national TV because we get to play Notre Dame and Clemson. And, those are things that they should be able to look at and say, hey, we're going to sell Notre Dame being part of our league, even if they're not, if they were smart. But the coaches just spend their time whining about Notre Dame. And it's like, how about you get good? You have a standard bearer in your league, and it's not Clemson right now. It's not Florida State right now. It's Notre Dame. Like, try to learn how to beat them, because if you can beat them, it can be great for your program. Look at the transfer class Louisville brought in that next year after beating Notre Dame as part of the sell that Jeff Brom had. Those things are huge. You just got to have the right mindset of it. So I'd like to see the ACC get back on track, and it's imperative that Florida State gets back on track. Well, they're a 9+ win team every year. It's imperative that Miami does the same thing. You're a 9+ win every team, and you need at least one of the Carolina teams to step up and be good. I don't care if it's NC State or North Carolina, to be a perennially good team. I think that's a big part of it. And Andrew Gilmore asked a question about how do the rumors of Clemson and North Carolina leaving as early as 27 affect the perception? Very much so. When it comes to recruiting, I don't think it affects the perception based on the beginning of our conversation, which is how they're viewed in the playoff. I don't think that matters. I think what matters there is how are those teams doing against other non-ACC teams. Like if they're out there winning games against other Power 5 leagues and looking impressive, no one's going to care what they're doing a couple years from now. They're going to care about, hey, right now, this is a good league. So perception, it hurts perception for Notre Dame off the field, from recruiting, from those type of things, from how people perceive the league. But I don't think it really has a lot of impact on what happens on the field. For Notre Dame, it doesn't help the league if those teams are good, because then there's all this turmoil. But as far as how the playoff committee is going to view it, I think it helps. And I think there's a lot of BS to some of those rumors. I really do, but they're not going to stop, and they're not going to stop because you sued the league. So of course people are going to think that, you're trying to get out still, but I don't think it impacts if, like, let's say next year Florida State and Miami are both very good, North Carolina's very good, and Notre Dame beats all three of them. It's going to still look very good on Notre Dame's resume. It won't care that in a year one of those teams might not be in. That's where I'm at.
Well, that's going to do it for part 2 of today's show. You guys know what it is. Be sure to hit that like button. We got 403 people watching us live today, so make sure that you guys hit that like button at some point throughout the show. Make sure you have that notification bell hit. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, it is time. We are getting into the third segment today of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. It is now time to talk about the ACC and give our predictions for how we believe the conference is going to shake out this year. And this is definitely one of the more interesting ones. This is my first time ever doing this. And so it was really interesting to go through and view matchups of each team's schedule and who was going to do what. Now, one of the disclaimers, and Brian can probably do a better job of explaining this than I can, but this is more of how we think the rankings are going to end up based on the conference schedule that these teams are playing. Brian alluded to it a little bit earlier, that our rankings don't reflect what we believe, say, teams 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are as good as what they are.
Right. It's not a power ranking of how good yes, exactly, Trev.
Exactly.
It's a prediction.
Yes.
Of the outcomes. Because I'll tell you right now, my top 17 would look very different if I was ranking teams based on how good I think they are. Very different. Like bottom and top. Like there's a team I have in my bottom 5 that I think is a potentially top half of meaning 8, 7, 8 talented team, but their schedule is absolutely brutal. And it's I don't know if they can, their in conference schedules terrible. Yep. And so yes, this is predictive. And honestly, Trev, one of the challenges I had is we'll just kind of talk a little bit about the ACC before we kind of dive into our predictions. Is my issue with the ACC this year is there's Clemson maybe is going to be a great team. Maybe they have a lot to prove. There's been people saying, well, I get why Clemson's getting all this hype. And I'm like, I don't. I think Clemson's going to be very good. And I have them in I think ranked 6th or 7th in my preseason top 25. But they've got a lot to prove. They played 5 good teams last year, went 1-4 against those teams and got blown out by 3 of them, including Louisville. And so that's the best team in your league right now. Like SMU's the second best team in your league right now, come from last year, and they lost to the only Big 12 team they played last year, and then also got blown out by a Big 10 team that they played last year. So I think the league has a lot to prove. And the issue that I have, the difficulty that I had, is from 2 to 9, you could they're interchangeable. And then in the bottom, there's a lot of interchangeable outside of the bottom 2-3 teams. And that makes it difficult. And that's where the scheduling has such a big role, because some teams have road heavy games against top teams. Some teams have home heavy games against top teams, which can really impact your schedule and really impact the results and makes it a little bit of a tougher league to evaluate.
Yeah, absolutely. And this just goes to show the biggest thing that stuck out to me. This is part of the inconvenience of having a 17-team conference, because it's hard to actually see who the top teams are in the conference because of the variance in the schedules. It's really difficult to say, hey, this is the second best team in the ACC. Well, how can you say that? They played the 4 worst teams in the league this year, and then their other 4 conference games were against 3 middle-of-the-road people and then Clemson. Whereas, the third-ranked team in this league maybe played 5 of the top 7 teams in the ACC. So that's just what makes it so difficult. And that's what I had that's what I had such a hard time with when I put these rankings together. And what I did is I didn't want to put a top 17 together and then look at the records. I just went through everybody's schedule, conference schedule, and did wins, losses. And then I saw how everything shook out. And I was like, that is wild that this is really how the rankings ended out. And so I'm interested to dive into this today. I think it's going to be a really fun one.
It is. And so before we get started, Trev, let's just pull up the FanDuel odds of the top 6 teams. This surprised me a little bit. I'm going to be honest with you. I should say some of it surprised me. I shouldn't say all of it surprised me. I expected it to be Clemson to be on top. I expected Miami to be 2nd or 3rd. SMU that far behind Miami did surprise me a little bit. Georgia Tech being 5 didn't surprise me. Duke being 6 did surprise me a little bit. And I don't think that I think part of it is because I was expecting everyone else to kind of view Duke the same way that I do. But there's a lot of hype about Duke getting that quarterback from Tulane and some other things they did this offseason that has some excitement on them. But I was a little surprised at how high Duke was, and I was a little bit surprised at how much further Louisville was ahead of SMU and Georgia Tech, and especially Miami ahead of SMU and Georgia Tech. Miami's lost to Georgia Tech each of the last 2 years, at home and away. They've lost to Miami everywhere they play, or Georgia Tech everywhere they play. And to see Miami at plus 400 and Georgia Tech at plus 1,300, I thought was a little bit of a surprise. So those were a couple of the things when I looked at the rankings for, or I should say the betting odds for FanDuel, I was a little surprised. And I know this isn't a ranking of the teams. This is a betting odds, but I'm still a little surprised at how much ahead of everyone else that Miami is at this point in time.
Yeah, I was too. When you first sent me these over, and I looked at what they were in my app, and I thought that Pitt might have been somewhere potentially in the top 6 because of how they started out last season. I thought they might have had a discussion or an argument to be somewhere inside of the top 6, maybe in front of a Duke, but I know they're getting a lot of hype this season. And then I'm with you. The gap between Georgia Tech and Miami, now some of that you're going to see shake out in my rankings as to why it also shocked me as well. But I didn't think the gap was going to be plus 900 odds. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, agree. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the league, Trev. Before we get started, I do on our team predictions and the rankings, we do have some superlatives that we want to hand out for the league. So we're going to predict our conference players of the year on offense, player of the year on defense, rookie of the year, and coach of the year. So we'll just go through that real quick, Trev, and say who our players are, and then obviously just give us a reason why. But I thought this was pretty fun, and what I like too is there's legit options beyond our picks. Like none of the picks were no-brainers for me, even offensive player of the year, because there were some other guys that you could look at. But let's start, Trev. I'll let you kick off I'll start off the top 20, the conference rankings, but I want you to start off. Give me your offensive player of the year, then I'll give mine, and then you give defense. We'll go offense, defense, rookie, and then coach of the year. So let's kick off. Who is your ACC offensive player of the year? Most outstanding, MVP, however you want to do it, just offensive player of the year.
I got CJ Bailey, quarterback at NC State. And if you guys are any fans of this channel, you know, Brian is extremely high on CJ Bailey. And then I went in and I popped in some highlight tape on him a couple weeks ago because I was like, look, man, if Brian loves this guy, I'm going to check this guy out, see what's up. I'm going to see what's going on. Also, just to make sure that when we're hyping him up, I'm not just like, I agree, Brian. I think he's going to be really good too.
Yes.
And I went and I popped in some film. Man, he's electric. He really is. And I think
that was a true freshman last year, Trev, too.
Yeah.
True freshman.
Yep. Going into his second year as a starter, they're kind of out of it wasn't necessarily quarterback drama. Unfortunately, Grayson McCall got hurt, and then he kind of had to step in as a true freshman. So it wasn't like what it was at Texas A&M with their QB drama, but he took over as a 18-year-old true freshman, was getting his feet under him. But what you see in between those lines is a really electric football player. I'm going with CJ Bailey because I think NC State is going to have a better season than what some might think that they will have. We projected them to be Notre Dame's trap game, but he's a newcomer. Quarterbacks will always be the first light of the discussion when it comes to offensive player of the years and end of the season accolades and things like that. And I was going back and forth between like maybe one of the more veteran quarterbacks in the league. And then I was kind of going back and forth of, okay, what do I think would be easier? Somebody like a CJ Bailey to kind of shock some people because people love that like newcomer aspect. Why do you think the odds to win the Heisman never end up like the first place odds to win Heisman never really end up winning the Heisman Trophy? I view it very similar.
When was the last time that happened?
I don't know. I'll look it up.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to look up the last time the preseason Heisman favorite won it. Pretty sure Travis Hunter wasn't the favorite last year.
He was not. Carson Beck was, followed by Dylan Gabriel. Yeah. Another conversation for another day. But
okay.
But when I look at this, I was thinking, okay, some of the bigger names of like the veteran quarterbacks in the league, like, you know, a Cade Klubnik, who I also completely understand if that's somebody's offensive player of the year rankings, because he put up some really good numbers last year and probably would have had an argument to win it if Cam Ward didn't do what he did last year as well. But I think just the newcomer aspect of CJ Bailey, the dual threat ability of CJ Bailey, I think that's going to take him over the top. I think he wins ACC player of the year for offense.
I'm going to even add to your case is to win a player of the year, you need to have a good supporting cast as well. You can't be a one-man show. And he'll have that. I love the support, the receiver group and tight end group, the pass catcher group that they have. Obviously, you've got Justin Jolly, who's a preseason American by a lot of people. You've got Noah Rogers, who I think is going to have a big year. I really like that receiving core. Wesley Grimes is a guy that I like a lot. The key's going to be the offensive line. Got Hollywood Smothers in the backfield. Like, that's a good group. I'm actually going to go with the preseason favorite, and that's Cade Klubnik for the reasons that you mentioned, Trev, about CJ Bailey. It's kind of similar with Cade. I think Cade's a dual threat quarterback. And really, when it comes down to it, my point about why I like CJ having a breakout year is partly he's very talented, and then partly it's the supporting cast should allow him to be at his best. But I just feel like the system at Clemson is going to allow Cade to have more production, which matters. Cade is a dual threat quarterback, which is going to help him in that regard. But I'm really high on Clemson supporting cast on offense this year. It's also going into year, 3 of the Garrett Riley era as the OC. So he should really have that offense mastered. But just having one of the 3 or 4 best receiving corps in the country is going to help. And the offensive line is expected to be better, I think should help them as well. And I just think that there's also some marquee game opportunities where CJ could play well, but be part of the losing team in some of those big games where it's really outside of his contention. And I think Cade will win most of those big games, those big game opportunities. And so that's why I have Cade as my top pick. But I absolutely love that you went with CJ Bailey because, as I've said, he is going to be fun. I was on this weekend, I was on a radio out in Oklahoma, out in Tulsa. They have me on every year to talk about Notre Dame and all that, and real good dudes. But they were talking about Notre Dame's schedule, and I was like, they didn't mention NC State. And I was like, don't forget NC State and CJ Bailey, because I think the kid's going to be a lot of fun. But I'm going to go with Cade on this one, and CJ would be my number 2 pick. Let's do defensive player of the year, Trev. Who you got?
We're going to stay on the Clemson train. And on defense, I have TJ Parker. He put up some gaudy numbers last year. He had 19 and a half tackles for a loss last year. He's credited with 11 sacks. Clemson is at their best when their offensive and defensive lines perform the best. Go look at 2018. Go look at 15 and 16. Argument could even be made for 20 a little bit. But yeah, I think that Clemson, to your point about Cade Klubnik, the spotlight's going to be on them, and it's not going to take long for them to get some national notoriety. They open up the year hosting LSU in Death Valley in a night game on Saturday, the 30th. And so I think TJ Parker is going to have a good year. I see him repeating that production, and I think the addition of Will Help is also going to free him up because now he's not just going to be the only edge rusher, premier edge rusher that they have. And so I think that's going to free him up to maybe increase the numbers a little bit. I don't know if he ends this year with Abdul Carter-like numbers, but I think that he'll get a slight bump in production from having another impact defensive lineman to go along with him and to go along with Peter Woods.
Yeah, I mean, and DeMonte Capehart, I believe, comes back, so that they're going to have a very strong defensive line. I was torn, Trev, between I had TJ Parker on my list. I'm also expecting Peter Woods to have a little bit of a breakout season as well for Clemson this year, and I thought about him, but I'm going to go with Kyle Lewis from Pitt for similar reasons that you're going with TJ Parker. Is number one, I think he's a heck of a player, just like I think that TJ Parker's a heck of a player, but also the production is big time. Like, look, you could be the most dominant guy on film, but if you don't have the production, voters aren't going to. I mean, that's the reality of it. They're just not going to vote you very high. And so when you look at a guy like TJ Parker, you talk about the dominance and all things he can do. But look, 19 and a half tackles for loss and 11 sacks last year, 6 forced fumbles for Clemson. I think part of the thing that had made me not go with TJ is because I do think I actually think the Will Help thing is going to help him as a dominant football player, but I think it might take away a little bit of his production. That you know what I mean? So, like, it makes Clemson better, but when you talk about voting for an award, like, this is what went through my head because I originally was with you. I had TJ Parker as part of that. It was my initial pick. I didn't want to go with 2 Clemson guys, but then as I thought through it more, I'm like, I think some of the production around him could maybe – so then he only has 15 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks, where you and I would watch the film and say, he's a way better player than he was last year. But the production isn't quite what it was. The reason I went with Kyle Lewis is because I just think the production is going to still be there because everybody that might take some away is back. The nature of the system is meant to be productive. If he can stay healthy, he's going to me, match or surpass his numbers from last year. And he's about the only guy in the ACC on defense that can say, hey, my numbers are as impressive as your numbers next to TJ Parker. It's really one of those two. unless you're going to predict someone breaking out, which you could certainly do. I thought about doing that with Peter Woods to kind of be outside the box, but I think at the end of the day, TJ Parker and Kyle Lewis are just too proven for me to go with anybody else. With Kyle Lewis, you're talking about a kid who had 101 tackles last year, 15.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, 9 quarterback hurries, 4 interceptions, and 3 pass breakups. He literally did everything for Pitt last year. He could stop the run, he could rush the quarterback, and he could defend the pass. He had 7 passes defense last year. You'd have to add up like the last 3 years worth of Notre Dame linebacker depth chart numbers to get to that over the course of a season. He did it in one season. He has a good supporting cast, which is something that matters for both of these kids. So you can't just focus all your attention on stopping them. We talked about it last week when we did our Pitt preview. D-line comes back largely intact. The other linebackers are good players. So I think Kyle Lewis is my pick for Defensive Player of the Year. I think those two guys, TJ Parker, Kyle Lewis, are going to be the cream of the crop. But I think that I'm going with Kyle Lewis on this one.
I was between those two, TJ Parker and Kyle Lewis. It was very, very close.
So we both had the same final 2. We just flipped them. So that makes it a little bit more fun. Let's go Rookie of the Year, Trev. And so for us, Rookie of the Year is a true freshman. So we could have gone Freshman of the Year. I just like Rookie of the Year. Not redshirt freshman, not newcomer. So we didn't do top newcomer because that gets a whole different group of people in the transfers and all that. We went top rookie, top first-year player. Who is the player in the ACC that you predict is going to have the best season of the rookies?
Yeah, I have Jaren Sensabaugh. I'm going with another NC State guy. So he's stepping into kind of the role that Tamarcus Cooley had last year, kind of like the slot corner back role from the things that I had heard. And Tamarcus Cooley last year for NC State, he was tied for first on the team in interceptions. He had 6 passes defended, ended the year with 39 total tackles. They're going to need him because when we did our NC State preview, we talked about how the secondary is going to have to take a jump. And I think that Jaren Sensabaugh is going to play a big role in that. I've seen some outlets predict him to be a starter. I've seen some have him rotate in. I think if he doesn't end up starting the season, I think that he will end up a starter like midway through the season. So he's a talented prospect. I mean, I believe that he was a 4-star rated kid out of Tennessee coming out of high school. So I like him. I like him as a prospect. This was between the rankings of the ACC, everything that we've done for this conference preview, the Rookie of the Year, I think, was one that I had the hardest time with. But it was between Jaren Sensabaugh or the Moore kid from Miami, the wide receiver. I was between those two.
Now, Trev picked a redshirt freshman, and this is part of the reason we didn't say top freshman. Because if we just said top freshman, we're going to go with true freshman because I hate when redshirt freshmen get put on lists.
Yeah, like freshman All-American list.
Right. But I do think rookie is good because it's kind of like baseball. Like you spend a year in AAA, you come up, you're still a rookie. You've been in professional baseball for 3 years, but you're still a rookie. So that's why we worded it, partly why we worded it the way we did. And Jaren Sensabaugh is a good pick. I think Josh Moore would have been a good pick. Josh Moore was my number 2. My number 1, I'm actually going with Gideon Davidson from Clemson. True freshman running back from Clemson, because right now he is in a battle to be the starting running back for Clemson with a guy that was playing receiver last year. Now, if they have any kind of success with converting a receiver to running back like Notre Dame had in 2015, then Adam Randall's going to have a pretty good year, and they're kind of similar athletes. But I think Gideon Davidson is going to emerge as a major force in that backfield. If he's the 1 or the 1, the 2 or the 1A, 1B, he's going to play a ton. He's going to be counted on a lot for Clemson this year. I think he gives them their most natural runner that is going to produce. I think the offensive line is going to be better. Clemson did not run the football well last year at all. And that was one of the major disappointments that I had with that line, because you had a bunch of guys coming back that played the year before, and they just couldn't get any continuity and just couldn't play with consistency. I do think this year that it's going to be different. I think you've got a bunch of guys coming back. What did we say? Something, Trev, like it's like, oh gosh, I mean, well over 100 career snaps. Like you had multiple guys with
career. Yep.
Yeah. Multiple guys like over 1,900 career snaps and things like that. Like it's a very experienced line. It's got some talent. Like I don't know that there's any future top 10 picks in that line, but some guys are going to get drafted in the NFL. It's very big. And now you're going into year 2 of Matt Luke being the coach. So now it's kind of like we saw a jump from Notre Dame's 2023 offensive line was disappointing in year 1 of Joe Rudolph, despite having Joe Walt and Blake Fisher and Zeke Correll. Year 2, despite not having those guys, despite not having 2 high NFL draft picks, despite not having a center who was an experienced veteran player, dealing with all the injuries they were still a much better offensive line in year 2 under Joe Rudolph because he knew the players, they knew him, and you got more success out of it. I see Matt Luke doing a similar thing with Clemson this year. Is this line's going to be better? They know him better. He knows them better. And, it's just you're going to have a line that's got more continuity. They've played together longer. And so I think that's going to really help Gideon Davidson be more productive this year than what we saw from P.J. Maffa last year or Phil Maffa last year. So that's why I'm going with Gideon Davidson. My number 2 is Josh Moore from Miami. I think there's enough balls that are going to get spread around that I don't know he's going to be able to produce the same way that Gideon Davidson is, but I would have been comfortable going with Josh Moore as well. Let's go. Let's wrap it up with Coach of the Year. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I love the Gideon Davidson pick because he's out of some of the newcomers that we talked about and that we looked at. I think that he's the one that kind of has to for his team. Mm-hmm. I mean, like Jaron Sensabaugh, my pick, like the NC State secondary has to pick up. But if it doesn't, I don't think we look at the end of the season and say, well, it's just because Jaron Sensabaugh didn't pan out. Same thing with the freshman wide receiver at Miami. But Clemson needs to find a way to be an all-around offense, and Gideon Davidson is – yeah. And so that's what I love about that pick for sure.
Yep. Let's go Coach of the Year, Trev. I know we have a different one on this one, so let's get into it. Who is your ACC Coach of the Year?
Mine is Brent Key from Georgia Tech. And reason being is I have Georgia Tech higher than what some other people do, but I think the stars are starting to line for him a little bit. He's going into year 3. He was promoted to head coach at the end of the regular season in 2022. So he has 23 under his belt, his first season. Last season, there were some promising pieces in there. And I go and I look at what they were able to do and how they competed last season. They lost to Louisville last year, but one of them was like a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. That game was honestly played out a little bit closer.
Closer before that. Yeah,
yep, than what the final score indicated. And then against Notre Dame, they hung in there. It's just they started Zach Pyron. Haynes King was out that game. And then just across the board, they just ended up getting out-athleted because they
Notre Dame beats Georgia Tech if Haynes King plays.
Agreed.
But I think the game looks different.
Yep.
I don't think it's 31-7 going into the last drive of the game when Georgia Tech put one late on the board. I think it's a more competitive game. You are correct.
I think it would have looked a little bit more like the Louisville game where Notre Dame was comfortably in command of the game, but it was on the scoreboard closer.
And they just wouldn't go away. Wouldn't go away. You were absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So my ACC Coach of the Year is going to be Brent Key. I think he puts it together in year 3. He has Haynes King coming back and Jamal Haynes. I like the recipe that they got going on down there in Atlanta.
I'm going with one, Trev. My pick made me want to barf. I'm not going to lie to you. It made me want to throw up a little bit. It did. But I had to be honest. And I think Pat Narduzzi is got Pitt poised for a breakout season. I don't think they were as good as they were maybe early last year. I don't think they were as bad as they were late in the year. I like this team coming back. They've got talent coming back, a running back. They've got receivers coming back. I think their offensive line is going to be improved this year. And Eli Holstein going into year 2 of running that offense. And then, of course, their defense should be much better this year than it was last year. It was very productive numbers-wise, but it wasn't productive as far as keeping people out of the end zone. And I think their schedule is more favorable this season. And that's really what it boils down to. If you were to ask me, this is an example of if I was going to rank my teams of power rankings, like who I think are the best teams, regardless of schedule, of whatever other context, just who has the best roster. I have Georgia Tech ahead of Pitt, but I don't have Georgia Tech ahead of Pitt in my rankings because I think Georgia Tech has a much more challenging in-conference schedule. And so I had to go with Pat Narduzzi. So I think, I can't get into too much of my other things because it'll start giving away some of my predictions, but I think that they surprised this year. A couple other guys that I considered Rhett Lashley. I considered Jeff Brom. I considered Brent Key are some other guys that I considered for that award this season. So those were the top candidates for me. And I considered Mario Cristobal because they've got a shot if he can get some things right to be up there. But I think they'd have to kind of win the ACC for him to get that when you consider how much hype there is about that team coming in, and they're coming off of a 10-2 regular season. So I'm going with Pat Narduzzi. And look, I believe Pat Narduzzi has won this award before, correct? So it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, there's only, I think, 2 active coaches in the ACC with ACC championships under their belt. That's it. Pat Narduzzi is one of them. So can't hate on him too much. I just wish he'd stop complaining about Notre Dame all the time and just kind of focus on his own program. But I do think Pitt is going to be a much better team this year. I think they're going to look a lot more like the 21-22 Pitt team than the 2023 Pitt team. So that's why I have them where I have them.
I like it. Brian, you ready to dive into the conference breakdown as a whole?
I am. So again, just a reminder how this works. We're going to go 17-1. So we're going to pick the teams we had at the bottom of the standings, work our way up. The way we're going to do it is instead of snaking 17 teams or just one guy talking for as long as it's going to take to get 17-1, we're going to go blocks of 5, go 13-17, and then 8-12, and then 3-7, and then we're going to then reveal who we have in the ACC title game. We're only going to give you guys our prediction for who wins the league. We're not going to give you records. We're not going to give you conference records, team records, any of that, because if we give that away, then it kind of starts giving away kind of who we might have in the playoff. Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to put our record predictions on the message board after our show on Saturday. We'll go in there and have that. But this is also based off a reminder. This is based off who we have based on their record. So it doesn't always mean I think this team is ahead of this team talent-wise. It's just this team has a more favorable schedule sometimes than that team. And so we'll talk about that. So I'll start off and give my bottom 5. Then Trev will give his, and then we're going to get down to work our way all the way up to the top. So for me, Trevor, when I talk about the bottom of the ACC, unfortunately, I have to go with Stanford here. And as we've talked a lot about, we talked about in our Stanford preview last week, too much turmoil, too much turnover for a team that wasn't that good to begin with. And then when you look at their schedule, I just don't think it works out super favorable for them. So I have Stanford finishing at the bottom of my ACC predictions. Next, I actually have Wake Forest, another team that's gone through a lot of change over this season. Dave Clawson is retired. They've hired a new coach who came from Washington State, did a nice job at Washington State, but inherits a very rough roster. And there's some talent at a couple spots, but overall, they have a pretty rough schedule this year. And the other thing too, Trevor, is their schedule this season also. I don't think Wake Forest has the second worst team in the ACC. I think they're bottom 5 in talent, but I think their schedule is what does it for me. They have to play. They have NC State, Georgia Tech, and SMU at home, which I'm kind of like you'd almost want to play those teams on the road because they're probably going to beat you. But they also have to play at Virginia Tech, at Florida State, at Virginia, and at Duke. It is a very challenging schedule for them this year. So I have them 16. I actually think they have a better roster than Cal. But again, schedule-wise, I think it works out a little bit better for Cal. I think another team, like there's just turmoil with all these bottom 3 teams. Just a lot of roster turnover, some coaching changes with the bottom 2. I think Cal just has enough high-end talent, and the schedule sets up favorable enough that they're going to win a couple games, in my opinion, just because teams have to go cross-country that aren't used to going across country. And we saw that last year in the Big Ten with Washington and UCLA and Oregon and, of course, USC. So I got Cal next at 15. And then number 14 for me, this one surprised me, Trevor, when I did my predictions, because I would tell you Virginia Tech has a better than 14th best roster. But there's just they have too many personnel losses, too many transfers, too many young guys that are unproven, but then also just a really rough schedule. This is another team whose schedule really has an impact on why I have them this low. They have to play at NC State, at Georgia Tech, at Florida State, at Virginia, and then they've got home games against Miami, Louisville, and that's just going to be tough. The only games that I look at are like, okay, surefire wins. They obviously have Cal at home and they have Louisville at home, but the rest of their ace in Wake Forest, not Louisville, Wake Forest at home. Outside of that, it's going to be tough sledding for them to win a bunch of games in the ACC. And especially, so like the bottom 3 are significantly lower than everybody else. There's one upset away from you going from 14-9, the way that my predictions finished in the rankings. So I have Virginia Tech 14th. They're a team that I think is going to potentially surprise me, but it all depends on how does Kyron Drones play this year. Can he be more consistent? That's the biggest key for them. If I had confidence Kyron Drones could be a steady player year after year, game after game, then I'd move them up. But he has some games where he is lights out and has some games where they could lose to Stanford and Cal, like the way he'll play. So he's going to have to be more consistent. And then number 13 on my ranking, Trev, is the North Carolina Tar Heels. They have a talented roster in spots, but they're a big unknown for me. Their schedule's somewhat challenging, but I just think North Carolina this year is not going to be what some people think they're going to be. Their roster's not great. They're asking a quarterback to make them an undersized quarterback to make them move from the G5 level. He's a nice player, but there's some good quarterbacks in this league this year, Trevor, and I don't know that he moves the needle a ton for them. So I've got North Carolina as my number 13 team in my preseason ACC predictions.
Yeah, I like those. I mean, we're going to have a lot of consistencies, especially 15 through 17. We have the same teams listed there. But getting into mine, my 17th team it's actually Wake Forest. Man, I know especially after the Stanford preview, I was kind of thinking about it, but the way that the schedule shakes out, I think Wake Forest, to Brian's point, I don't love their in-conference schedule. But the thing that set it apart for me, I thought Stanford had a lot of incoming transfers. Wake Forest said, I see you, Stanford. Let me do you one better. They brought in 35 incoming transfer portal players after losing 27. You compound that with a first-year head coach at Wake Forest, I think that could get real messy real quick, especially when you think of, they're on the road against Florida State, on the road against Virginia, on the road against Duke. You get Georgia Tech, you get NC State. And that could be a very slippery slope for them in the ACC. So I have Wake Forest as my 17th team. Stanford is my 16th team for all the reasons that Brian discussed, for everything that we discussed. The roster's not great. The internal turmoil with that program is rough. Just hired an athletic director, have an interim head coach, and then still a host of transfer portal players that they're relying on. So not expecting a whole lot from the Cardinal this year, unfortunately, because they are also on Notre Dame's schedule. We talked a lot about, the ACC kind of needing to pick up their game. I think Stanford is the farthest away from returning to what they were in comparison to us talking about Florida State and Miami and Clemson getting back to the dominant team they were. I think Stanford has the farthest to go. So they are my 16th ranked team. And then my 15th ranked team, Brian and I see that the same. It's Cal. A lot of different turnover with their team. They lost, at one point this offseason, they didn't have a running back on their roster because they all transferred. That was quickly figured out, and they brought in a transfer, but all 5 of their scholarship running backs transferred between the winter portal and the spring portal. They got decimated with it. Oh, it is.
I've never seen an entire position group leave.
Oh, I haven't. An entire position group is crazy.
Unless it's like your kicker. Like your kicker leaves. Entire depth chart left. How many kids play? 1. Had 1 kicker. Yeah.
We lost all of our kickers. He left.
Well, they're named. It's just 1 kid.
No, I get you. And their schedule doesn't do them any favors either. They're on the road against Boston College. They get at Louisville. They're on the road, or they play SMU as well. They play Duke. So I think Cal's going to have a rough go at it this year. That one is more for kind of talent on their roster as well for what they lost. My 14th ranked team, and this one was a little interesting, but I have Syracuse as my 14th ranked team. When I was going through, and I believe I did the prediction show with them, or their opponent preview show with Vince. And that was kind of when I got my first look at what Syracuse's conference schedule was and just what their overall schedule was going to be. And I don't love it. They're on the road against Clemson. They host Duke. They're on the road against SMU. They get Pitt. They get Georgia Tech. They're on the road against Miami, and they also get Boston College. You compound that with the fact they lost 4 of their top 5 pass catchers. They're in the middle of a quarterback battle right now, and it's between 2 people who I don't know if they're going to be able to repeat Kyle McCord's production. Yeah. You lose some impactful transfer portal impactful players to the transfer portal, one of them being Murad Watson, who's now at Texas, the other one being Trevor Pena, who's now at Penn State. You combine all that with their inability to run the football. They had an 1,000-yard rusher last year, but that didn't stop them from ranking 93rd in the country in rushing offense.
Because it's like when Notre Dame got 1,000 yards from Darius Walker. Like, he's the only guy that carried the ball.
Exactly.
So it's like, he's a good back, but overall your running game is not that good.
Mm-hmm. So Syracuse, how it shakes out, I don't know if when you watch them play, this was one of the cases for me that I think how they perform in games would put them higher than the 14th ranked team. I just don't love their schedule, and you compound that because I love Fran Brown as a head coach, which leads me to think that out of some of those games, they might sneak out a win in there. But then I also think back to this was also a team that lost to Stanford last year, kind of out of nowhere. And so I don't know what that's going to look like with the talent of this roster. So I have
lost to
Syracuse at
Boston
14.
College kind of out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yep.
They are
And
also
then
a victim of their own success, Trev, because they did so well last year. All of a sudden, their roster starts getting picked apart by teams willing to spend a lot of money on those individual players. Yeah.
My 13th ranked team is the Virginia Cavaliers, and I have them there. I'm not overly in love with the talent that they have on their roster. They have some good pieces, but then it comes down to their schedule. They're on the road against NC State, opening up conference play on the road against an NC State team that Brian and I both believe to be much improved this year. I think that's going to be tough. They obviously lost an important piece in Malachi Fields. We know where he's at right now. Quarterback play is going to have to take a step up. Their defense is going to have to take a step up. And when you open conference play against CJ Bailey and their host of skilled talent, I think that's rough. They also get Louisville on the road. They have to travel out to Cal. Now, they are benefited by the fact that they also have Cal, Wake Forest, and Stanford all on their schedule.
Yeah.
And so that's going to help them out quite a bit. But, I don't love what some of their other conference games are. So I have them at 13th.
So let's go to 12-8. And I have the Cavaliers 12. So we're not that far off, Trev. And here's what I actually like about Virginia. And I actually think if I'm wrong on them, there's a chance I could be wrong and they finish even higher, partly because of what you were just talking about. They have a schedule that's a lot more favorable than some other teams on there. You mentioned they play at NC State. They play at Louisville. Those are both tough games that I think are likely losses. You look at Stanford at home. They get Florida State at home. They get Wake Forest at home. And they get Cal on the road. That's a winnable game. And then if they get Virginia Tech at home, and then at Duke is a winnable game as well if they can get better quarterback play and their offensive line play. They made some really important pickups in the portal this year on the offensive line, on top of having a couple pretty good players coming back. I like their receiving core. It's surprisingly good despite losing Malachi Fields. It's deep. It's steady. There's nobody on Malachi's level, but there's some solid players there. They have a dynamic running back in Xavier Brown. And they have a lot coming back on defense in the front seven, which I think is important. And they got a transfer from out of the portal named Devin Neal. He made the mistake of leaving Louisville after 23 and going to Baylor. And he got hurt. It didn't work out for him. He's a really good player. And I wish he would have stayed in Louisville. But he's now at Virginia. He knows the league. He's a talented player. But as you said, it comes down to, can you get good quarterback play? And when I look at that, I think that's the biggest key to them. They were a 5-7 team last year, Trevor, and you lost a close game to Louisville. They were playing with Clemson for a while. Clemson pulled away late. There was a couple other games where it's just like your quarterback play was so bad that you were out of the game before you could blink. And they go out into the portal and they get a quarterback in Chandler Morris, who's a good football player. He's obviously Chad Morris' son, so he knows football. He's a coach's kid. Last year at North Texas, he passed for over 3,700 yards, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He transferred from North Texas. He's a kid that was a TCU before that, struggled to stay healthy. This is a guy that beat out Max Duggan at quarterback in 2022 on that TCU team that went and played for the national championship, but he got hurt in the first game of the year. And so he kind of, bounced back from that. So he's shown he can play at the Power 5 level. This isn't a guy that's never been at that level. He's only at North Texas for 1 year. And I think he's a good quarterback, good coach's kid. But here's the thing. It's kind of like Michigan. Just a good, solid quarterback is significantly better than what they had last year. And their quarterback play was so terrible last year, Trevor, that it just made them overall as a team look worse than they were. And I think Chandler Morris coming in helps solidify that and helps that team be better. And then, of course, like their schedule, I think that helps Virginia. They're a sleeper team for me. Number 11 on my list is Syracuse for all the reasons you talked about, Trevor. Way too much roster turnover. Quarterback roster turnover, offensive line roster turnover, receiver roster turnover. And where you had a quarterback last year that was a transfer, but he was a transfer who threw for over 3,000 yards in the Big Ten the year before and led his team to the Cotton Bowl that season. So a kid that went into Notre Dame Stadium and made the throws on that final drive to beat Notre Dame. And now you're going to two kids that have got talent, but two kids who have combined one career start between Steve Angeli and Ricky Collins. So, and then of course their defense wasn't that good last year, and they lost most of their top players from the defense. So, combined the losses combined with a really rough in-conference schedule is why I have Syracuse down at 11. Number 10 for me is the Duke Blue Devils. I'm not as high on Duke as other people. There's a couple reasons why. I think they have a good roster. I'm not as high on Darian Menson as others, but I think he could be better than what they had last year. I was very disappointed in the season that Malik Murphy had at times. I thought he flashed some good things for at times, but then he also he would make some bad turnovers. I mean, they were beating Duke, and then he just has Miami, and then he just has some awful turnovers in the second half that cost that team some games. But when I look at Duke, Trev, and I really break them down, I see a team that's not great offensively. I see a team that won, in my opinion, with a lot of smoke and mirrors last year. I don't know that their success is they can replicate it. You talk about a team that barely beat Northwestern, a team that barely beat UConn, a team that beat North Carolina by a point. They beat Florida State by a touchdown, and in that game, Florida State gave them 2 touchdowns in that game. And I remember watching that, being at a hotel on the road for Notre Dame, watching that. I think it was the week that Notre Dame played. It was the week they played Georgia Tech, I think. Then you lose to SMU by a point, so that was a close loss. Then you have a win over NC State where you pull away late, beat Virginia Tech by 3, beat Wake Forest by 6. Like, there was a lot of those games where I just didn't think they played great. I just thought the team they played was bad. And that's Duke was one of the least impressive 9-win teams I saw last year. They just, in my opinion, they were. And so I don't know if you can replicate that. Now, they've got some good transfer portal pickups, and they're recruiting a high school level pretty well. But their schedule being what it is, and the fact that I just don't really love that roster, and I think they were a little bit of a kind of caught some breaks last year. I think they're a team that takes a little bit of a step back this year, and I have them finishing 10th in that league. Number 9 for me, Trev, is Boston College. This is a team that, depending on how a couple things go, could slide down or potentially slide up. And BC's an interesting situation because we don't know who their quarterback's going to be, and that always gives me pause. But the way I look at it is if Bill Bender, I have to call my guy Bill that I said his name instead of Bill O'Brien. But if Bill O'Brien can win 7 games last year with Thomas Castellanos, who's a terrible fit for his system, or the guy who may start for him this year, then I think they've got a shot. And when you looked at BC last year, Trev, and I look at how they performed down the stretch with Grayson James, a quarterback, and you say, boy, that offense started to kind of figure some stuff out late in the year. Finished the year 3-2. The bowl game was a weird, ugly game, but a 5-point loss in Nebraska. Beat North Carolina convincingly, beat Pitt convincingly, beat Syracuse, barely lost to Louisville. Like the team, they were winning like by almost 20 at one point that time of the game. The BC team we saw the last 6 games of the year after the Castellanos changeover was very different. And if Grayson James gets beat out by Dylan Lonergan, I'm going to like them even more. But they've got a quality secondary. They've got legit skill players at wide receiver. The big question marks I have for them are along the lines, which is usually a strength for Boston College. So if they can figure that out, I think BC's got a chance to be a sneaky good team this year. Their schedule sets up favorably. They get both Stanford and Cal. They're at Stanford. They're home against Cal. They get SMU at home, Georgia Tech at home. So I think they're capable of pulling off some upsets. And then you got obviously at Syracuse, at Louisville, at Pitt will be tough games. But they can beat those teams. And so I'm a little higher on BC than I definitely was last year. I thought Bill O'Brien was a bad fit for them and for those quarterbacks, but they're going to bounce back a little bit. And then you got number 8, the Florida State Seminoles, probably the hardest team I had to project because they're basically a brand new football team. But I look at it and I'm like, okay, the talent is still pretty good. Not as good as it was a couple years ago, but it's still good. And there's still good football players on that team, Trev. And I look at them and I think that they're at least good enough. And the schedule sets up well enough that I think that this team has a little bit of a bounce back. I mean, that's still 8th in the league. But The concern I have is I'm very worried about their defensive line. That's the area where it could sink them. If their defensive line struggles, then I think they could struggle and finish in the last group, the 13 to 17 group. But I think their offense is going to be good enough to get them back on track. They're going to need Thomas Castellanos to stop talking and start playing more, because he's a – yeah, let's leave it at that. But I don't really know what to expect from Florida State, but when I look at their schedule, Trev, I see enough on there, like enough favorable aspects to it to say I think their schedule helps them. You know, they play Virginia on the road, they get Pitt at home, they get Wake at home, they get Virginia Tech at home, they play at Stanford, which is certainly a game they can win. Obviously at Virginia Tech or at Clemson and at Virginia or at NC State are going to be tough games. They get Miami at home. So I just think overall their schedule is set up favorably for them to have a nice bounce back. And I think he made good coordinator hires this offseason as well. So I do expect a little bit of a bounce back from the Seminoles. They won't be as good as they were 2 years ago. Won't be as bad as they were last year. They'll be somewhere in the middle.
I like it. I like it a lot. My number 12 team, and there's not much variance here, but it's the North Carolina Tar Heels. I think, Brian, you had them at 13th, and I have them at 12th. And it's for all the reasons.
North Carolina and Virginia.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's for all the reasons that you talk about, man. I don't love their roster, on top of I just don't love the Bill Belichick hire. So when you compound those two things together, yeah, I'll say this. Their schedule gets helped out by the fact that they get Cal, Syracuse, Stanford, and Wake Forest. And so they're a team that could be a little higher than, 12th, 13th, maybe because of who their opponents are. But it's just one of those that I just don't know what to expect from them, truly. And so I have them at 12th. Again, it goes down to the talent on their roster and their coaching hire. My 11th team is Boston College, and this one could be one that I look back and regret on having them at 11th, because it's going to depend on who they put at quarterback. I think Dylan Lonergan raises their ceiling a little bit. I love Turbo Richard at running back. I love Lewis Bond and all the receivers that we've talked about this offseason. But I don't love some of the opponents that they get. To Brian's point, they're winnable games, but when you look at it in a vacuum, they're on the road against Pitt, they host Clemson, they're on the road against Louisville, and they get SMU and Georgia Tech. That is a tough ACC slate, but winnable games for Boston College. Not so much in the light of how I talked about Syracuse, where they have those opponents, and I don't think they can compete to the level that Boston College can. I think for me, the biggest thing it comes down to is, are they going to be able to generate pressure on defense like they can? They got some good pieces coming back, but I think Donovan, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Ezerikow, leaving, I think, is going to play a pretty big factor. We're talking about somebody who had 20 and a half tackles for a loss last season. The next closest player had 7.
Crazy production.
I mean, 20 and a half tackles for a loss, 16 and a half sacks, and the next closest person had 3.5. And so if they're defensively, if they're not able to generate enough pressure, that does give me pause about their defense a little bit. I'm confident in Bill O'Brien as an offensive head coach, but it is a young, skilled position group with an inexperienced quarterback going in, whether it's Grayson James or it's Dylan Lonergan. I don't know if you want them getting into shootouts every single week. And so that's going to be an interesting part to Boston College's success, but they do have the pieces there. And with Bill O'Brien going into year 2, they could be higher. It would not shock me in the slightest. At number 10, I have Virginia Tech. And this is a team where I love the talent on their roster, but to Brian's point, what he talked about earlier, they have a really, really tough in-conference schedule. They're on the road against NC State. They're on the road against Georgia Tech. They play Louisville. They're on the road against Florida State. They also get Miami, and they're also on the road against Virginia. Now, it does help them that they play Cal and Wake Forest and Virginia. I think that helps them a little bit, but I think that there's going to be a game or two where the talent on the roster kind of shines a little bit and they sneak up on somebody. Last year, I believe, last year they beat Georgia Tech 21-6. And it could be a similar situation where they sneak up on a team that might not be expecting them a little bit. But again, I think it's going to have to be at home, because I think their road schedule is pretty tough. I don't know if I see them winning at Florida State. I very well could, because we don't know what Florida State's going to be this year. But you're also on the road against NC State and on the road against Georgia Tech, which I think is going to be rough for the Hokies this year. Number 9, I have Florida State. Now, I think they are going to be helped out a little bit by their schedule because you go through and you look at who they have. And Florida State has on the road against Virginia, on the road against Stanford. They're home against Wake Forest. I don't love that they end the season on the road against NC State, but I also think Florida State's going to be helped out by the fact they don't leave the state of Florida until the 1st of November. And so I think
Them and
that's
Miami
also
both, man. It's crazy.
which is why maybe it's Miami is the team that I'm thinking of that doesn't. I know one ACC team did.
They only leave twice. It's Stanford and Virginia. That's it. They're home against Bama, home against East Texas, home against Kent State, home against Miami, home against Pitt. So 5 of the first 7 games are at home, and they have 2 byes. So their third road game doesn't come until November 8th.
Okay.
They're on the road 3 times in November.
Good Lord. I mean, so I go through and I look at Florida State, don't know what to expect. Again, it's a completely new outlook team. I doubt Mike Norvell goes 2-10, but then I also doubt he goes 13-1. And when you have that wide of a margin, I don't know where they fall. And so I'm putting them kind of smack dab in the middle of the conference, mostly because I do think they are helped out by what their schedule is. At Virginia, at Stanford, home against Wake Forest. I would be surprised if they didn't come away with wins in those games because of what the roster makeup looks like for some of those programs. But I have Florida State as my 9th team. At number 8, I have the SMU Mustangs. Now, this one was an interesting one for me because I don't think they repeat the same success that they had last year. I think they lost some key pieces on offense. I think losing Brashard Smith is going to be an impact for them. Their running back from last year, he was a dynamic playmaker. But, I look at their schedule. They get Louisville. They are on the road against Clemson. They get Miami. They're on the road against Boston College. So don't love those. But then again, they're also at home against Syracuse. They're at home against Stanford. They're on the road against Wake Forest. And they also get Cal. So when you get Cal, Stanford, and Wake Forest in your conference schedule, I kind of like those odds for SMU to walk away victorious in some of those. It's going to come down to what Kevin Jennings does in big moments because we've seen an inconsistent sample size from him. First half against Clemson, not great. Second half against Clemson, he lit it up. And then we all know what happened against Penn State. So I think SMU's success is going to come down to how does he perform against Clemson? How does he perform on the road against Boston College? How does he perform against Miami? It's going to be interesting for me. I could see SMU moving up these rankings a little bit, but right now I have them at number 8.
That's one of the ones that we have the biggest disagreement on so far. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but I'm going to throw a little curveball, and we're going to both have to answer this question, but I'll ask you first, Trev, because we're in your section. Who are the 1 or 2 teams that you see in this list that you think have the best shot to jump up in the rankings? Not go from 9 to 7 or 11 to 8, but like 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th to top 5 in the league.
Mine are probably just in this chunk that you see right here. I mean, between
that's what I meant from this group, like from this group.
SMU and Boston College.
Okay.
Honestly, I mean, I love the talent on what Boston College has on their roster. Just quarterback questions, to your point, Brian, always make me a little iffy of vaulting somebody up until I see it. And then with SMU, they have a track record in 1 year in the league of having success in it. SMU comes over and in 1 year they're in the conference championship. And so those are probably my 2 teams that I could see vaulting up very quickly.
I'm with you on BC. My other's Florida State. I could see Florida State being up 5 spots. I could see Florida State being down 5 spots. They're incredibly difficult to evaluate, but there is talent there. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes me think they could have that bounce back year. If their D-line is any good at all, I think this team could be a lot better. Let's go here next to my next 5, Trev, numbers 3 to 7. I have the NC State Wolfpack number 7. And honestly, I wanted to put them higher. There's a couple reasons why I didn't put them higher. We've talked about this. I love their quarterback. Love their wide receiving core. I think their offense this year could be really good. A couple things that hurt NC State. I have some questions about their defense. It was really not good last year and really struggled last season. I also don't think their schedule their schedule's kind of middle of the road. They've got some wins, some potentially not easy wins, but winnable games on there. You get Virginia at home, you get Virginia Tech at home, you get Georgia Tech at home, you get Florida State at home, you get North Carolina at home, you get at Wake, at Duke, and then at Pitt, at Miami. So it's a pretty favorable schedule. But really, what it boils down to for me is Dave Doran's got to show me that he can get this thing turned around and that they can get their defense playing better football. Because I thought the biggest disappointment of their team last year. I don't consider their offense a disappointment because your starting quarterback got hurt and you played a freshman the rest of the year and your offense had some good moments. Their defense was abysmal last season. Gave up almost 30 points a game. You give up 51 to Tennessee, 59 to Clemson. You give up 34 to Wake Forest, who wasn't even good. You give up 30 to North Carolina, whose offense wasn't good. You give up 30 to Georgia Tech, 29 to Duke, 28 to Stanford. The defense was incredibly disappointing last season, and that's going to have to get a lot better, and I need to see it to believe it because I like the talent. I don't love the talent on defense. That's the thing that holds them back, in my opinion. Number 6 on my list is the Louisville Cardinals. Now, keep in mind that, so for me, 3 to 6 all had the same exact conference record. So I had to get into some tiebreakers and who beat who and those type of things. So I have Louisville number 6. I could absolutely see Louisville being higher. And everything I just said about NC State applies to Louisville. I could see Louisville playing for the ACC title. I could see Louisville finish 8th or 9th, and it all is going to come down to what can Ron English do with the defense. Their offense is going to be one of the 2 to 3 best in the ACC this year, in my opinion, even with Miller Moss, a quarterback who I'm not a big fan of. Number 1, you have one of the best offensive minds in the game. I think their offensive line might actually be a tad better than last year, even though it's a little bit remade. I think their running back room is as good as anybody in the country outside of the one in State College and the one in South Bend. Like, they legitimately have arguably the 3rd best, if not even 2nd best running back room in the country. I don't think they're 2nd best, but I think you could at least have a conversation about it from a depth standpoint. But outside of the top 2, I think they're in that conversation for the next best. And I absolutely love their receiving core. Really like their receiving core this season, Trevor. I look at that football team and obviously getting Colin Lacey back. Now, you're going to need him to stay healthy. That's going to be a big part of this for Louisville. So if Colin Lacey can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a big year. I love the pickup of Dakari Collins from NC State. I think he gives them a big-bodied player on the outside that's good. Chris Bell is a kid that had some really good moments last year. They picked up some transfers for depth. So I think their offense is going to be very good. I do. The concern I have is their defense. If their defense is better, they can win the league. If their defense doesn't get better, then they're going to finish around here, and that's really what it boils down to for me. Number 5 on my list is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. This is 100%, Trevor, 100% about their schedule. And the fact that the concern I have about their team is they did lose a lot along both trenches from last season. Now, they got some good players coming back, but that's a bit of a question. If Haynes King is healthy, they have a shot to be in the conference championship game. But the thing that hurts them compared to some teams I have ahead of them is their schedule. They get Clemson at home. That's going to be obviously a tough game. They have to go at Duke, at NC State, at Boston College. They also have to play Virginia Tech at home, Syracuse at home, Pitt at home, and then Clemson at home. They also play at Colorado, which is in their non-conference. So it's not like they don't have Miami, they don't have SMU, but there's some really losable road games in there, mixed in there, and that's kind of what separates them with some of the teams that I have ahead of them. Like, for example, I have the Pitt Panthers at number 4. And as I said before, I think these teams are somewhat interchangeable. But what I like about Pitt is I think their offense is going to be better this year because you're going into year 2 of the Cade Bell era. If you can keep your quarterback healthy, I think their O-line will be a little bit better. But they've got really good skill talent and a really good big-armed quarterback. Their defense is the thing that I have more confidence that Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi are going to get that defense going than I do Ron English, for example, or the new first-year D coordinator at NC State. Georgia Tech's interesting because my concerns with them is I loved their D coordinator last year in Tyler Santucci, but now they're back to a first-year guy. Now, they went and got a guy that everybody loves, the kid from Texas that was their secondary coach, but he's a first-year coordinator at a new place. It's not like if Mike Mickens were promoted at Notre Dame where, okay, a guy that's been in the system is now being promoted. This is a guy coming from outside the system that's now being promoted to being your defensive coordinator, which gives me a little bit of pause about how much can he get the defense better? I don't know that. I got to see it first, but I do have faith that Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi can get that defense back on track. So I have Pitt number 4. I think Pitt's schedule is also a little bit more favorable than Georgia Tech. So although they do play Georgia Tech gets Pitt at home. So that's something that could factor into, the rankings being a little bit different. But I actually, prediction-wise, I went with a little bit of an upset on that one and picked Pitt to win that game just because I think the matchup is, I think that Pitt defense can with their speed can match up a little bit better against Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech also just has that one game a year at least where they just like, how the heck did they lose that game? And that's the one I have this year. And then with Pitt, their schedule, they get Louisville at home, they get Boston College at home, they get NC State at home, they get Miami at home. So like the best teams they play outside of Georgia Tech are all at home. Now they do have to play at Florida State, they do have to play at Syracuse, they do have to play at Georgia Tech, which aren't going to be easy. But the real good teams they play this year, they get at home. And I think that in conference, and that's going to help them. Number 3 on my list is the Miami Hurricanes. I think Miami's going to be just like they were last year, a team that is pretty good, but just not quite good enough to win the league. And, and part of this comes down to schedule, Trev, but I do have some questions about, if you have a first-year coordinator, how Carson Beck is going to fit in. I have some questions about their secondary. I mean, their secondary's got some major question marks. Their receiving core is a major question mark. So, and then how's Corey Heatherton going to do as the D coordinator? Yeah, he did a nice job at Minnesota last year. I believe that's his only year as a defensive coordinator at the P4 level. So that's still a little bit of a question mark for me. The other part is their schedule's challenging. They have to play at Florida State. They have to play at SMU, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. And so when I compare them to my number 2 team, it's a much favorable schedule. And then some of their home games are going to be tough too. They get Louisville at home, which is not going to be an easy game to win. They get Syracuse at home, who beat them last year, and then they get NC State at home, which is a very dangerous game for them. It's a trap game for them, and the same reason that it's a trap game for Notre Dame, which is it's right in between Syracuse, and they're going at Virginia Tech. And then, of course, they end the season in 2 cold weather environments, which for Miami could be in late November, could be challenging. But you could argue that Miami has the second best roster in the league, but they don't have the second most favorable schedule in the league. And that's why I have the Hurricanes number 3.
Switching gears back over for my number 7 team, I have the Duke Blue Devils. And very similar to what Brian talked about last year about how they just kind of had the most boring 9-win season of all time. I think that's just kind of what they're going to do this year. I think they're in conference. I think they're going to beat the teams that they're supposed to beat. And I think they lose to the teams that they're probably supposed to lose to. I look at their schedule. They get NC State, they get Georgia Tech, they get Clemson. But again, they're also helped out by the fact that they also get Cal, they get Wake Forest, they get Syracuse. And so I think that they're just going to be a run-of-the-mill, kind of above middle of the road, if not middle of the road ACC team. Duke is one of those teams that it would not surprise me at all if they slide out of the top 7. But for me, a lot of it just comes down to their schedule and who they have. I'm not in love with the talent on their roster. I think they're a well-coached football team. That's how they managed to win some of those games that they had last year. So yeah, I have them at number 7. When we get into my number 6 team, these are the team like 3 through 6, 4 through 6 are pretty interchangeable, but I do have Miami. I'm not as high on Miami as what others are. You guys are well aware of that. I don't think they're going to be 4-8. I don't think they're going to be Florida State. I also don't think they're the number 10 team in the country right now. I think they've lost way too much. I do. You lose Cam Ward, who was the number 1 overall draft pick in the NFL. You lose an 1,000-yard running back, and you also lose your top 5 pass catchers from last season. That is a lot to replace in one offseason. And the transfer portal quarterback you bring in has health problems and developed a little bit of a turnover problem in 2024 that he didn't really have in 2023. And so I look at that. I do like the talent in their trenches. I do. I think that they're going to succumb a little bit to, like, they're going to be a victim of their own schedule a little bit. The fact that they don't leave the state of Florida until November 1st, I think is going to hurt them because their final conference games, you got NC State at home, then you travel to Virginia Tech, and then you also travel to Pitt. Those are their final 3 conference games. Those are going to be tough road games, and you're going to play in environments that is very different from Miami, Florida in November. Very, very different. I also think them hosting Louisville early in the year, I think Louisville's going to remember a little bit of that game from last year, that 52-45 loss at home.
Louisville gave that game away, Trevor, 100%.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a good amount of players on that team that are going to kind of remember what happened last year, and they're going to walk into that game a little bit of your chip on your shoulder of, okay, did Miami, the program, beat us, or was it the fact that you had Cam Ward and he threw for like 5 passing touchdowns that game and Damian Martinez went for like $180 or something? So what's really the real Miami here? So I have them finishing 6. I could see them going higher. I don't really see them going lower. I'll say that about Miami. I
would argue
think
that's their floor. Without a doubt, that's their floor.
I think that they have some of the most room to rise up inside of the top four-ish.
I think they can win the league. If
I
everything
do
clicks,
too.
I think they can win the league. So agree. They have a high ceiling, but I do agree that's their floor. If they finish worse than 6, it was a bad year for them.
Yep.
A really bad year.
I do not see them going below 6. My number 5 team, the Louisville Cardinals, for a lot of the reasons why you talked about. There's 2 things that it comes down to. I'm not going to echo too much about the defense. I don't know how much I trust Ron English. Their schedule's like relatively favorable, honestly. I mean, you get Cal, you get Virginia, but then you also get Pitt on the road, you get Clemson, you get SMU on the road. I think there could be a little bit of upset action there, but who knows? It's kind of how it played out on my little notepad conference breakdown here. But I'm also not super confident in Miller Moss. I've said this a lot this offseason, and if there's one thing that Lincoln Riley can do, it's develop quarterbacks. I don't know if he can lead a team. I don't know if he can lead a program. I know he can develop quarterbacks. Miller Moss had a little bit of a turnover issue last year. That's why he went away from Miller Moss, and he was the first quarterback under Lincoln Riley's tutelage that had those turnover issues. He's going to another genius offensive mind in Jeff Brom. Can he be the one that helps turn that around? Potentially. I'm not closing the door on that at all, but I'm going to be very interested to see what he does with those. Now, the pieces around what he's going to have are great. Top 3 running back room in the country, in our opinion. I love their receiving core. They replaced Ja'Cory Brooks with the NC State kid that's coming in, another big-bodied guy.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
well, you could even argue that they're replacing Ja'Cory Brooks with Colin Lacey.
Yeah.
Like just because he was out for so much of the year last year.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Yeah.
But between the defense and Miller Moss is a big question mark to me. If he can he can go and keep them in games. If he's sharp, he can also play them out of games if gets turned over.
If he could play against Ron English's defense every day, he might win the Heisman.
I was about to say, he might be lighting it up in fall camp right now for all we know, because we'll see.
That doesn't tell us a whole lot, because I think the last time he played against a Ron English defense, what did he throw, like 6 or 7 or touchdowns or something like that? It was absolutely nuts, but that was in the bowl game. I was actually watching that game in the airport, Trev, and it was kind of funny watching that game play out, because you're just like, this Louisville, like, what happened to this team? Like, they were really good at times. But Miller Moss against Louisville. You want to know why Bobby Petrino went after Miller Moss? Because when he faced him in the ball game 2 years ago, he went 23 of 33 for 372 yards, 6 touchdowns, and a pick against Ron English's defense. So, But to your point, Trevor, I mean, he had 4 games last year over 300 yards. Had another game of 293 yards, had another game of 283 yards. The problem is that in those 9 starts, he also threw 9 picks. Yeah. Like to your point, like, he can produce. It's just the turnovers were and it wasn't just the number of turnovers, it was when he would turn the ball over. It was crushing at times.
It was the crucial moment. There's a reason why USC had a lead on teams in the fourth quarter, and in every loss that they had, blew those leads in the fourth quarter. Not all because of Miller Moss, but a lot of untimely picks. So if Jeff Brom can get that figured out, Louisville's well in contention to play for the ACC championship. But if the defense and Miller Moss end up kind of on the negative end of that spectrum, it could be a really interesting year. A year similar to last year for Louisville, for sure. When I get into my number 4 team, this one I'm pretty high on. It's NC State, and they are home to my offensive player of the year. Love what CJ Bailey's going to be able to do within that offense. Some of it, honestly, it's kind of just that Dave Dorn effect. When there's not a whole lot of expectations on his plate, that's just kind of the year where it's like, wait, NC State is what right now?
To your point about expectations, Trev, just looking at the FanDuel betting odds, they have the 8th best betting odds in the league, and they're closer to number 9 than they are number 8. Or I mean, number 7. So they're number 8. Florida State's ahead of them at plus 3,100. NC State's at plus 4,000. They're closer to actually Pitt and North Carolina are right behind them at plus 4,500. So to your point, like, the expectations aren't super high for NC State this season, which is right in Dave Dorn's wheelhouse.
I mean, literally, it's We've seen it year over year. Now, the interesting thing that gives me pause about this is we're also talking about a coach that I don't believe has ever had a 10-win season. And
Yep.
so it's going to be really interesting to see how Dave Doran kind of compounds the low expectation versus the legitimate top level talent he has in the ACC. I mean,
certain spots, yeah.
CJ Bailey, Justin Jolly. You know, I like some parts of their defense. That's ultimately what it's going to come down to. The success of
this
NC
is year
State this year.
13 for him, Trev. Year 13 for him, and he's never had a 10-win season. He's had a bunch of 9-win seasons. And to your point, them finishing 4th probably has them at 9 wins again.
Yep.
Especially since they play Notre Dame out of conference.
And they're one of the very few ACC teams that plays 9 conference opponents because they have that rivalry with North Carolina at the end of the year. I thought that was interesting as well. But NC State, it'll be interesting to see how they fare. I have them at the number 4 team right now. Number 3 is Pitt. Now, between my 2 and 3, I think that it's interchangeable, but I really like Pitt. The question comes down to is the health of Eli Holstein and which version of Pitt is the real Pitt.
Yes.
I mean, you start out the season 7-0 and then you finish it 0-6. Are you more of 7-0 Pitt? Are you more of 0-6 Pitt? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Somewhere in the middle puts you in this 3-6 range in the ACC standings.
Mm-hmm.
But being either 7-0 Pitt or 0-6 Pitt, I think dictates whether you're playing for the conference championship or not. The pieces are there. I think they have an underrated receiving core. You and I both think that Desmond Reed is a top 5 running back in the country.
Yep.
I like what Eli Holstein did. He is one of very few quarterbacks that to start last season with 5 straight games with 3 touchdown passes in each game. I mean, he started the season out with 15 touchdown passes and I think 1 or 2 interceptions. And then he ended in the final 6 games, also due to injury, I think with 1 touchdown pass and like 2 picks. And so it was in
the last 7 games, like so in the last 8 games, so first 5 he had 15, only threw 2 touchdowns the rest of the way. To your point, but he played 5 games where he didn't throw he didn't throw a touchdown in 4 of them. And then the only game he got hurt in, like on fewer attempts, is like against Louisville. He only had 5 attempts, but he had time to throw a pick in that game before getting knocked out. Yeah, he had 2 touchdowns and 4 picks in the last 5 games. To your point,
yeah, I mean,
15 and 3 in the first 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's tough. I mean, you go and you look at how they ended their season. They climbed their way all the way up into the, I believe, inside of the top 20 of the AP poll, and then they fell out. And so it comes down to who the real Pitt is. Can Pat Narduzzi put it together? He's another seasoned coach in the ACC. If he can put it together, it would not shock me in the slightest if Pitt was playing for another ACC title like they did in 2022 or 21, 22?
21.
21, thank you. It would not shock me in the slightest. But if they're somewhere in the middle, I could see them kind of being that like 8-4 team that's somewhere in this like 4 through 6 range. But if they can put it all together and Eli Holstein can stay healthy, love the pieces that they have on offense and defense. I mean, Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, love those linebackers. I mean, I think it was I think Rasheem Biles led the team in passes defended and Kyle Lewis led the team in interceptions. And I think both were 1 and 2 for tackles for a loss last year. To Brian's point earlier, they're do-it-all linebackers. I love the pieces that they have.
Yep. So let's get to our championship game picks, Trev, and I'll go first. I've got the Clemson Tigers against the SMU Mustangs. I have a rematch. I didn't want to go with the rematch. I don't believe that SMU would be my number 2 team if I was doing a power ranking. As I mentioned before, they'd be my top 4, however. But there's a couple reasons why I like SMU to be the opponent for Clemson this year in the ACC championship game. And the biggest one really comes down to schedule. I think that they have a very, very manageable in-conference schedule. They get Louisville and Miami at home. So you've got these teams are going to have to go all the way down to Dallas to play this game. They also get Syracuse at home. They have Stanford at home. They do play at Clemson. Think that's a loss. But their other road games are at Wake, at Cal, and at Boston College, which is a winnable game as well. I mean, you look at their schedule, Trev, and if you want to go back to my bottom 5 teams, which is North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Cal, Wake, and Stanford, they play the bottom 3 teams on the schedule and this year. So I think that the schedule is going to be very, very pro SMU this season where it's a little bit more challenging for other teams. I also think their offense is still going to be very good. Their offensive line being made over is a little bit concerning for me. That's the one thing I have an issue with. You mentioned, they did lose L.J. Johnson, who left to go to Cal. They should still be okay at running back. They had 3 kids that carried the ball a decent amount last year. The thing that concerns me about Pitt, and if I'm wrong in this, or I mean about SMU, and if I'm wrong about this prediction of them being the ACC title game, it won't be because of the offense. It'll be because of the defense. The most underrated part of SMU's football team last year was their defense. They gave up 22 points a game. A lot of that was because they gave up 34 to Clemson and 38 to Penn State at the end of the year. At times, their defense was pretty solid last year, and it was really good in 2023. But they only have 2 starters coming back off their defense, and that's what gives me pause. And I'd say they are not in my top 2. If I'm just saying who has the best team, take the schedule out of the equation, then SMU's not my top 2. But when you look at a schedule that has Syracuse at home, Stanford at home, at Wake, at Cal, your 2 toughest games, 2 of your 3 toughest games are at home. I think it sets up nicely for SMU to repeat and get back to the ACC title game. I don't feel great about this prediction, but a dynamic quarterback, experienced players coming back, including an experienced quarterback, and a team that's going to be confident that they can go in and compete because they did it last year. Can he keep them hungry, though? Or do they become overconfident? That's a little bit of my question. But I think the thing that he's going to be able to sell this year is, hey, people don't respect us. People have Louisville and Miami ahead of us in the rankings. We beat both of those teams or not Miami, but we beat Louisville last year. We beat that team last year. And they don't respect us. Like, what has Miami done? They didn't do what we did last year. So I think they can kind of play the disrespect card. If you look at the FanDuel conference winning the odds for winning the conference, they have SMU 4th, despite finishing the last regular season 1st. So I think that's going to be a big thing for SMU is the disrespect card a little bit. But disrespect can only take you so far. It can't make you tackle, can't make you read a defense and those type of things. But I just think there's too much skill, too much experience, too much firepower on offense, and a very favorable schedule for me to have them lower than this. But there are probably at least 2, maybe 3 teams that I'd rank ahead of them on my power ranking. But those teams have very different schedules than what SMU has next year or this year. But I have them number 2. My number 1's Clemson. I think the only question for me with Clemson is, are they going to be a national title contender? That's still a big question mark for me. But last year, as down as they were, Clemson still played for the ACC championship. And, you talk about a team, Clemson, they got killed by Georgia, lost to South Carolina. Okay, they still won the league. You know what I mean? For all the issues they had and the ups and downs that they had last year, getting embarrassed at home by Louisville, blowing a game against South Carolina, getting blown out for Georgia, they still won the ACC. They still made 2 and won the ACC. And Dabo, for even during this stretch of years where Clemson hasn't been as good as you'd like them to be from 21 to 24, this is not vintage Clemson. They still won the ACC twice in that stretch. They won it in 24, and they won it in 22, beat North Carolina. So they still won 2 of the last 3 ACC championships despite being down. Well, I think this is going to be their best team since 2020. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be good enough to play for a national championship. We'll find that out next Saturday. But I still think it makes them the cream of the crop in the ACC because they're going to be better than last year, and they won it last year. You know what I mean? So it's like it's hard for me to go against them. So I'm going with Clemson number 1, my prediction is that Clemson will once again win the ACC, not just get there. So I do have them beating SMU, and I don't think Clemson's a great matchup for SMU. There are other teams on this list. Pitt would be a tougher matchup. NC State and especially Louisville, Georgia Tech, teams like that would be tougher matchups just as far as where SMU is good and where Clemson is good. But I think it's going to be Clemson and SMU, and I have the Tigers winning it.
Love it. I love it. My number 2 team, and if you guys are kind of tracking, by process of elimination, I have my number 2 team being the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Common theme with today, I think Brent Key is going to be the ACC Coach of the Year because he leads them to the ACC Conference Championship game. Here's a little nugget for you, and I know that we're not talking about overall records, but the reason why I said that I wouldn't have any pushback if somebody wanted to flop my 2 and 3, because Pitt is my third team and Georgia Tech is my number 2 team, is I have them at a 1-game difference, with the tiebreaker being their final conference game, which is against each other when Georgia Tech hosts Pitt. I think that is going to be a very underrated matchup late in the season that I don't think not enough people are talking about. But I really like what Georgia Tech brings back. I do get nervous, to Brian's point about their defensive coordinator hire. I really love Santucci last season. You bring in somebody from Texas who was running an SEC secondary, but it was a successful secondary. I'm kind of putting a little bit of blind faith in there of, hey, like what would have not putting him on the same level, but what would have like a Mike Mickens type of position coach done if he went and became a defensive coordinator at a program not as big as Notre Dame? And that's kind of how I view Georgia Tech's hire of the Texas kid. And that's what makes me a little bit more confident in their defense. Lost some pieces. I still like their size up front, but it comes down to their offense. You have Brent Key going into his third year. You have a veteran quarterback coming back, but in the same light as Pitt, can he stay healthy? That's the biggest question. And it's just it was such a weird season for Haynes King last year. I mean, towards the end of the season, Zach Pyron, he played against Notre Dame, and then Aaron Philo was their leading passer in their next 4 regular season games until Haynes King came back against Georgia, and he threw for 303 yards and rushed for 110 in Athens. But, even in the Miami game, he wasn't able to finish, but he went 6 of 6 for 32 yards and a touchdown and had 20 carries for 93 yards and also a touchdown. And so, again, what's the real version of Haynes King that we are going to see this upcoming season? If he can remain healthy, I love their chances. And then you have Jamal Haynes coming back in the backfield. It's going to be interesting to see what Georgia Tech does this year. I know one of their receivers from last year also returns. Malik Rutherford comes back. I think Chase Lane for them also returns. I think he could be in for a good season. And so I have Georgia Tech at number 2 and then Clemson at number 1 for all of the reasons that Brian talked about. I think that they have probably the best roster from top to bottom in the ACC. Mm-hmm. You have a veteran quarterback coming back. I think they have the best receiving core in the ACC, one of the best in the country, one of the most experienced offensive lines. And again, Dabo has been at his best when he has experience and talent in both trenches. And that's consistent with 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And so I think Clemson and Georgia Tech play for the ACC Conference Championship. And then, Brian, are we predicting winners in this one yet or no?
Yeah, I did. I went with Clemson.
I am also going with Clemson.
What's interesting, Trevor, is I said this in the chat, but I could see Georgia Tech being in it. I actually like Georgia Tech's roster better than SMU's top to bottom. I could see Louisville being in the ACC title game, and I could see Miami being the ACC title game, or really the teams that I could see making it. What's interesting is where I have Pitt. I don't have Pitt as a team that I expect to have a shot to get in. And the reason that I have it that way is because where I have Pitt in my rankings is that's their ceiling. Their ceiling is 4. I don't think I think their schedule's set up to where they could max out at 4, but aren't going to go higher. To your point, like they have to play at, they host Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech could beat them. You know what I mean? So I could see Georgia Tech being higher. I could see Louisville. I could even see NC State if they put it all together getting here. But I think the reason I don't have Pitt is because I think Pitt's ceiling is 4. That's where, because they're a very veteran team in a lot of places. I don't know that they can get over the hump to get into the title game. I could be wrong on that, but I think the other teams have a better shot at getting in. But Pitt's just solid. I think they're just going to be solid here.
That's where I'm at. Yeah, Georgia Tech is an interesting one, especially when you talk about their schedule. I mean, the key to their success is going to be holding serve at home on the road. Excuse me. On the road, you get Wake Forest. You're on the road against Duke. You're on the road against NC State. And you're on the road against Boston College. Your final 2 road games are going to be significantly more difficult than your first 2 road games. But one of the things that helps them out is in between that, they don't have SMU on their schedule. There's no Miami. There's no Florida State. And there's no Louisville. Starting out the year against Clemson to open up conference play is going to be difficult. But we're going to find out a lot about this Brent Key Georgia Tech team. I'm not expecting them to win that regular season game. But if they are competitive and it looks like what it did against, when they went through and they had some of their close regular season games last year, I go back and think of, what they did when they beat Miami 28-23. If it looks something competitive like that, like I said, I don't know if they walk away with the victory, but if it's competitive, it's going to give me a lot more confidence that this prediction is going to come true. But if they go and they host Clemson, because they do get Clemson at home, and they just get absolutely ran out of the building, not going to feel that confident about putting Georgia Tech at 2. But the pieces on their roster I really, really like. And so it's where we're at, man. It's going to be an interesting year in the ACC.
Here's an interesting thing for you. I actually have Georgia Tech upsetting Clemson this year.
Ooh.
So in my rankings, that would be a rematch and Clemson would have been the team that lost, which I think would make for a very ugly ACC title game for Georgia Tech. I think the payback would be heck. But yeah, that's how I feel about Georgia Tech. There's going to be some dank games this year where I think they're going to look like the best team in the ACC 2 or 3 Saturdays. But I just think there's going to be weeks where they look like, how did they lose that game? Like there's too many teams in the ACC like that, Trevor. Louisville's that way. I think Georgia Tech's that way. I think that NC State's that way, where you're just like, one week you watch them, you're like, man, that's a good football team. And then the next week you're like, who is this? Yeah. Who are these imposters? This isn't the team I watched last week. And that's what I think makes this a very challenging year to predict as well.
Yeah.
So that's it. So we both have Clemson as the ACC champions in 2025. So 3rd out of 4th years, Clemson is going to win the ACC championship, according to us at Irish Breakdown. And most of the chat. I mean, there's only been a couple people I've seen have anyone other than them winning it.
Yep.
So that's our ACC prediction. That was fun.
Good deal. That was
fun. I mean, the only really big disagreement we had was SMU. We were within 2 to 3 spots of each other on most of the other picks, but the SMU one is the one we had very different.
Yep, and it's one of the ones too where I even talked about, like, it would not surprise me if they jumped up.
Yeah.
It's
just does the 1 year make you a believer or not? That's the challenge. You're like, yeah, it went well last year, but their schedule was incredibly favorable, and there's a lot of things you can kind of spin into it to say, like, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about that one, but yeah, that's where I'm at. Yep.
Well, listen, folks, that is going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. On your way out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. It helps with the algorithm and all of those things to help gain us a little bit more traction. But the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. The guys are going live tonight at 5 p.m. on IB Nation Sports Beat, so hop over and check them out.
I'll be on at 5:30 talking about Elijah Golden.
There we go. So you guys are going to get a double dose of Mr. Driscoll today. So be sure to hop over
tomorrow, baby.
Sure is. I'm excited for that one. That one's going to be good. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. where we preview the SEC conference. Same format of what we did today. But until then, for Brian, I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.